Tonight, we're exploring the complete history of House Strong. There is a lot to explore here, but I'll keep the pacing gentle so you can still settle in and fall asleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. House Strong's story is written in the shadow of Harrenhal, the immense Riverlands castle, whose melted black towers have watched generations of lords rise, fail, and vanish. By the reign of King Viserys, the first Targaryen, the Strongs held this ominous seat, though they were not counted among the ancient great dynasties whose names commanded whole kingdoms. Their power came by quieter means: land, service, learning, and a talent for standing near the right people at the right moments. The house had known royal service long before the Dance of the Dragons. One of its earlier members, Sir Lucamore Strong, wore the white cloak of the Kingsguard during the reign of King Jaehaerys I. He was remembered as Lucamore the Lusty, a celebrated knight whose private life became a public disgrace when it was discovered that he had secretly taken several wives and fathered many children. His fall was severe, and his story offered an early reminder that even a white cloak could not protect a man from shame. Yet House Strong endured. In time, its most respected son emerged, not from the practice yard, but from the courts and chambers of the realm. Lyonel Strong was a man of law, measured speech, and considerable learning. He served on King Viserys' small council, first as Master of Laws, where his judgment earned the king's trust. When Sir Otto Hightower was dismissed as Hand of the King, Viserys chose Lyonel to fill the vacant place beside the Iron Throne. For House Strong, it was the height of its worldly ascent. The Lord of Harrenhal now advised the king on every great concern facing the Seven Kingdoms. Lyonel was not known for theatrical displays, nor for the sort of blazing ambition that left courtiers whispering behind their sleeves. His strength was steadier than that. He understood precedent, he understood consequences, and, perhaps most importantly in Viserys' increasingly divided court, he could recognize an uncomfortable truth even when no one wished to say it aloud. Lyonel had 2 sons, whose lives would carry the Strong name into the heart of the coming crisis. The elder was Sir Harwin Strong, a powerful knight called Breakbones. Harwin possessed the physical force his father did not need to display, and he became captain of the City Watch in King's Landing. Broad, strong, and admired in the training yards, he seemed well suited to a world in which strength could be measured by a blade, a shield, or the force of a man's arm. The younger son was Larys Strong, a quieter and far more difficult figure. Larys walked with a clubfoot, and while Harwin's presence was immediate and obvious, Larys made himself easy to overlook. He listened, he waited, he gathered the small, neglected pieces of information that other men carelessly scattered around them. In a court where every marriage, glance, and rumor could become a weapon, this made him formidable. Harwin's closeness to Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen became one of the most persistent secrets in King's Landing, though it was hardly a secret in the ordinary sense. Rhaenyra was married to Sir Lyonel Velaryon, but when her sons Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey were born, many at court saw in them the dark hair and familiar features of House Strong. Officially, they were Velaryons. Publicly questioning that claim was dangerous. Privately, the whispers never truly faded. Lyonel understood the danger of those whispers. The question was not merely who had fathered 3 princes. It was whether those boys, named as heirs to Driftmark and placed close to the line of succession, would one day be accepted by the lords of Westeros. Every resemblance became political. Every insult carried the possibility of bloodshed. Harwin, whose attachment to the princess seemed deeply personal, found himself at the center of a conflict that could not be solved by strength alone. Then came the fire at Harrenhal. Lyonel Strong and Harwin Strong were both within the castle when flames consumed the chambers where they slept. Father and son died together, and in a single night the respectable public face of House Strong was nearly erased. Some called it misfortune, another cruel chapter in the long history of Harrenhal. Others suspected murder. In the years that followed, suspicion settled most heavily around the surviving son, Larys, whose influence grew sharper and stranger after the deaths of the men who had stood before him. With Lyonel gone, the king lost a hand who had offered calm counsel. With Harwin gone, Rhaenyra lost a protector whose place in her life had been impossible to name openly. And with the elder Strongs dead, Larys inherited not simply a castle, but an opportunity. Harrenhal remained vast, cursed, and half-empty beneath its broken towers. But the man who held it had learned that in troubled times, a whisper could travel farther than an army. Harrenhal was not always a seat of House Strong. In fact, for centuries, the largest castle in all of Westeros stood as a monument to ruin, a blackened skeleton of melted stone that seemed to repel the living. Its towers were twisted into grotesque shapes by dragonfire, and the halls where Harren the Black once held court had become a place of echoes and shadows. The Riverlands had known many lords, but few dared to call Harrenhal their home for long. The castle was too vast, too cold, too hungry. It consumed dynasties the way winter consumed the harvest. And yet, for a family like House Strong, Harrenhal represented something irresistible, a seat that could elevate a modest house to the highest tier of power in the region. House Strong did not begin as lords of Harrenhal. They were a Riverlands family of respectable but unremarkable origins, their lands and holdings scattered along the banks of the Trident. They were not descendants of the first men kings, nor did they claim descent from the Andals, who carved their way across the continent. Their strength was not in bloodlines that stretched back into the Age of Heroes. It was in something far more practical, the ability to serve, to administer, to be useful to those who held greater power. In a realm where swords and dragons often decided the fate of houses, the Strongs chose a quieter path. They became masters of law, stewards of estates, and counselors to lords who needed men who could read, write, and remember. The castle that would become their defining symbol had a history that predated them by generations. Harrenhal was built by Harrenhal, the last king of the Ironborn, who ruled the Riverlands during the time of Aegon's conquest. Harren was a man of immense ambition and cruelty, and he forced tens of thousands of laborers to raise the largest fortress the world had ever seen. Its walls were thicker than any in Westeros, its halls large enough to hold entire armies, and its towers so tall that they seemed to pierce the clouds. But when Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters came with their dragons, Harren's great work became his tomb. Vhagar, Meraxes, and Balerion melted the stone of Harrenhal around him, and the castle has never fully healed. The stone still weeps in places, and the fires that consumed the Whore King left a curse that clung to every subsequent lord. For generations after the conquest, Harrenhal passed from hand to hand, each new lord hoping to tame it, each failing in some way. Some died young, others lost their fortunes trying to maintain the impossible structure, and a few simply vanished into its endless corridors. The castle became known as a place of ill fortune, a prize that tempted the ambitious and destroyed the unwary. And yet, when the opportunity arose for House Strong to claim it, they did not hesitate. It happened during the reign of King Jaehaerys I, the Old King, whose long and peaceful rule saw the consolidation of royal power across the Seven Kingdoms. The previous Lord of Harrenhal had died without clear heirs, and the castle reverted to the crown. King Jaehaerys, seeking a loyal and capable house to hold the strategic fortress, granted it to Lord Bywin Strong, a man whose family had served the crown faithfully for decades. Bywin Strong was not a warrior of legend, nor a dragon rider, nor a kingmaker. He was a lord who understood that power in Westeros often came not from the battlefield, but from the council chamber. His family had built a reputation for competence and discretion, and the king trusted them to hold Harrenhal, not as a symbol of conquest, but as a seat of order. The Strongs moved into the castle with the quiet determination of a family that intended to endure. They repaired what they could, sealed off the wings that were too damaged to inhabit, and began the slow work of making Harrenhal a home. It was never a comfortable home. The castle was too large, too cold, and too full of memories that did not belong to them. But it was theirs, and in the Riverlands, holding Harrenhal meant that House Strong could no longer be ignored. The castle itself became a kind of character in the family's story. Its immense size meant that even a wealthy lord could only staff a fraction of its rooms, leaving vast stretches of empty stone where the wind howled through broken windows. The kitchens were so far from the great hall that food often arrived cold. The towers were so tall that the guards stationed at the top could see half the Riverlands, but they also caught the worst of the storms. And beneath the castle, in the cellars and dungeons that had been carved into the rock by Harren's slaves, there were places where the torchlight seemed to dim and the air grew thick with something that was not quite silence. The Strongs learned to live with these things, but they never forgot that Harrenhal was not a gift. It was a test, and yet, for all its burdens, Harrenhal gave House Strong something they had never possessed before: visibility. The lords of Harrenhal were among the most prominent vassals in the Riverlands, and their voice carried weight in the courts of the Trident. When the crown needed a master of laws, it was a Strong who answered. When the king required a hand who could navigate the complexities of court without drawing a sword, it was Lyonel Strong who stepped forward. The family's rise was not dramatic, not marked by great battles or sudden conquests. It was slow, deliberate, and built on the kind of steady competence that kings valued because it was so rare. But the shadow of Harrenhal never lifted. The castle's curse, if it could be called that, was not a matter of ghosts or spells. It was a matter of expectation. Every lord who held Harrenhal was watched, measured, and judged by the standards of the castle's terrible history. Could they hold it? Would they be consumed by it? The Strongs had done well for 2 generations, but the question lingered, waiting for the moment when the family's fortunes would turn. And in the reign of King Viserys I, that moment arrived. The family had reached the height of its influence, with Lyonel Strong serving as Hand of the King, and his sons moving in the highest circles of the realm. But the closer a house came to the Iron Throne, the more exposed it became to the fires that burned beneath the surface of court life. The story of House Strong is, in many ways, the story of Harrenhal itself, a structure built for greatness, haunted by the ambitions of those who built it, and ultimately unable to protect those who called it home. The family rose through service, through law, through the quiet accumulation of trust and influence. They did not ride dragons. They did not command armies that could shake the kingdoms. They stood beside the throne and offered counsel, and for a time, that was enough. But in Westeros, enough is rarely enough for long. The castle that had raised them would also become the stage for their undoing, and the fires that had once melted the towers of Harren the Black would return, not from the sky this time, but from within the walls themselves. As the court of King Viserys grew more divided, as the question of succession began to poison every relationship and every alliance, House Strong found itself caught between loyalties that could not be reconciled. Lyonel Strong, the Hand of the King, tried to hold the center, to remind the lords of the realm that law and order were the foundations of peace. But the whispers had already begun, and the cracks in the family's unity were widening. The sons of Lyonel Strong were walking very different paths, and the castle that watched over them all seemed to wait, patient and hungry, for the moment when the Strongs would finally learn what it truly meant to hold Harrenhal. The castle they called Harrenhal was not built to be a home. It was built to be a monument, a declaration of power so absolute that it would outlast its creator and defy the gods themselves. Harren the Black, king of the Iron Islands and the Riverlands, began its construction nearly 3 centuries before the events of the Dance of the Dragons. He was a man of immense ambition and even greater cruelty, and he wanted a fortress that would make every other castle in Westeros look like a child's sandcastle. He forced thousands of laborers to work for decades, quarrying stone from the hills of the Riverlands and hauling it to the shores of the God's Eye. The castle's towers rose higher than any in the Seven Kingdoms, its walls thicker than any siege engine could breach. Harren named the tallest tower after himself, and he called the entire structure Harrenhal, as if the very stone would echo his name forever. But the day Harren finally moved into his completed castle, he looked out from the highest window and saw something he had not expected. Dragons. Aegon Targaryen had landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush with his sisters and their 3 beasts, and he was not impressed by stone. Aegon offered Harren a choice: bend the knee or burn. Harren, arrogant and stubborn, refused. He believed his walls could withstand any fire. He was wrong. Aegon's dragon Balerion, the Black Dread, turned the castle's towers into furnaces. The stone itself melted, running like wax down the walls. Harren and his sons perished inside their own fortress, roasted alive in the throne room they had never even sat in. And so Harrenhal passed into legend, not as a triumph, but as a tomb. From that day forward, the castle carried a reputation that no amount of renovation could wash away. It was cursed, not in the sense of a spell cast by a witch, but cursed by the weight of its own history. Every family that took possession of Harrenhal seemed to wither. The first to hold it after the conquest were the House Cohaeris, a Valyrian-blooded house installed by Aegon. Within a generation, the line was extinguished by fire and sword. Then came the Towers, who lasted a few decades before they were wiped out in a feud. Then the Harroways, who rose to prominence only to fall into ruin after a disastrous marriage alliance. And then the Strongs. By the time House Strong inherited Harrenhal, the castle was already known as a place where ambition turned to ash. But why? Why did so many lords believe that Harrenhal brought misfortune? The answer lies in what the castle represented. It was not just a fortress, it was a statement. To hold Harrenhal was to claim dominion over the entire Riverlands, a region that had always been a battleground for the great powers of Westeros. The castle commanded the crossroads of the continent, controlling trade routes and military passages. Its lands were vast and fertile, its revenues immense. Any lord who sat in the Hall of 100 Hearths could field an army that rivaled the might of the great houses. That kind of power attracted enemies from every direction. The Ironborn wanted it back. The Lannisters coveted its strategic value. The Tullys resented its independence. And the crown, whether Targaryen or Baratheon, always kept a wary eye on whoever held Harrenhal, because a lord with that much strength could become a king. So the curse was not supernatural, it was political. The castle's very size made it impossible to defend without a massive garrison, which drained the treasury. Its reputation made it a target for every ambitious rival, and its history of violent turnover meant that any new lord was immediately suspected of plotting treason. To hold Harrenhal was to sit on a throne of knives. You could rule the Riverlands, but you could never rest. And the Strongs, when they finally took possession, would learn that lesson in the most brutal way imaginable. But before we reach that fire, we need to understand how a family of lawyers and administrators rose from the banks of the God's Eye to become the lords of this cursed castle. Because the Strongs were not warriors by nature. They were scholars, stewards, and masters of the law. And that is what made their ascent so remarkable, and their fall so devastating. And so, the great castle of Harrenhal stood, a monument to ambition and ruin, its towers blackened by dragonfire, its halls haunted by the memory of Harren the Black. For generations, lords had come to claim it, only to find that the castle seemed to claim them instead. But before we turn to the family that would one day rise from its shadow, we must first understand the land that shaped them, the Riverlands. This is a region unlike any other in Westeros. It has no natural borders, no mountains to shield it, no vast seas to guard its shores. It is a land of rivers and rolling hills, of fertile fields and ancient forests, and it has been fought over more times than perhaps any other corner of the continent. The Riverlands are the crossroads of the realm, and to hold them is to hold the heart of the Seven Kingdoms. But to hold them is also to invite endless conflict. Before the Targaryens came, the Riverlands were a patchwork of petty kingdoms and warring tribes. The first men had settled here, raising their wooden keeps along the banks of the Trident. Then came the Andals, sweeping across the narrow sea with their steel swords and their faith in the Seven. They conquered, they intermarried, they built new houses. And slowly, a fractured political world emerged. A world where power was measured, not by the size of one's army alone, but by the strength of one's alliances, the cunning of one's marriages, and the weight of one's name. For centuries, the Riverlands were dominated by a handful of ancient families, the Blackwoods of Raventree Hall, who claim descent from the first men and still worship the old gods in their godswood, where a great weirwood tree stands, its branches black with the rooks that give the castle its name. The Brackens of Stonehenge, their ancient rivals, who follow the faith of the Seven and have feuded with the Blackwoods for so long that no one even remembers how the bloodshed began. Then there are the Tullys of Riverrun, who rose to prominence not through conquest, but through diplomacy, and who would eventually become the Lord Paramounts of the Trident under the Targaryen dynasty. And the Freys of the Twins, a house as numerous as it is ambitious, whose wealth and strategic position at the crossing of the Green Fork gave them a power that far exceeded their reputation. These were the houses that shaped the Riverlands in the centuries before the dragons. They were old, proud, and deeply suspicious of one another. They fought over land, over honor, over slights both real and imagined, and beneath the watchful eye of the Iron Throne, they continued their rivalries, their alliances, their endless games of shifting loyalty. It was into this world that House Strong was born. But unlike the Blackwoods or the Brackens, the Strongs could not trace their lineage back to the Age of Heroes. They had no ancient legends, no songs sung in their honor. They were not kings of old, nor did they claim descent from the first men or the Andals in any direct line that anyone cared to remember. They were, in the simplest terms, a house of the Riverlands that had risen through service. And that, perhaps, was their greatest weapon. Not ancient blood, not a storied past, but usefulness. In a land where old grudges ran deep and old names carried weight, the Strongs offered something else: competence. They were administrators, stewards, men of law and order. They knew how to manage estates, how to navigate the tangled web of Riverlands politics, how to make themselves indispensable to those in power. And in a world where the great houses were often too busy feuding to notice the quiet rise of a lesser family, that usefulness could be a very powerful thing indeed. So as the centuries passed and the Targaryen dynasty settled into its long reign, the Riverlands remained a land of ancient rivalries and shifting fortunes. The Blackwoods and Brackens continued their endless war of words and arrows. The Tullys held their seat at Riverrun, ever watchful, ever cautious. The Freys multiplied and schemed, their fingers in every pie, and somewhere in the midst of all this, the Strongs began to build their own legacy, not with swords or songs, but with ink and parchment, with loyalty and patience. They were not the first house to rise through service, and they would not be the last. But their story would become one of the most remarkable in the history of the Riverlands, because it would lead them to the very heart of the Iron Throne itself. For now, though, they were simply a name among many, a family waiting for the moment when their usefulness would be called upon. And that moment would come, as all moments do, with the turning of the wheel. The crown would need men who could govern, who could speak the language of law and order, who could be trusted to serve without ambition, and the Strongs would answer that call. But before we follow them to King's Landing, we must first understand the nature of the world they were about to enter. A world of dragons and courtiers, of whispered secrets and open ambition, where the greatest weapon a man could carry was not a sword, but a name that meant something to the right people. The Riverlands had always been a patchwork of feuding houses, where ancient grudges ran deeper than the trident itself. Families like the Blackwoods and Brackens had spent centuries locked in a cycle of blood and retribution, while the Tullys, as lords paramount, struggled to hold the region together. But amid this fractured landscape, a new kind of power began to emerge, not born from conquest or legendary ancestry, but from competence, loyalty, and a quiet understanding of how the machinery of the realm truly worked. That family was House Strong. Before they ever set foot in Harrenhal, before their name became synonymous with scandal and tragedy, the Strongs were simply a respectable Riverlands house. They held lands and a keep, though history has not preserved its name with any certainty. What mattered was not where they came from, but what they did. The Strongs built their reputation on two foundations: the law and the sword. They served as stewards, judges, and castellans for more powerful lords. They were known for their reliability, their ability to administer justice, and their willingness to enforce order. In a region where chaos was the norm, such qualities made them invaluable. It was this reputation that first brought them to the attention of the Iron Throne. The Targaryen kings, especially Jaehaerys I and later Viserys I, valued men who could govern without favoritism, who could untangle the endless disputes that plagued the Riverlands. House Strong produced such men. Lyonel Strong, the most prominent of them, rose to become Master of Laws, a position that placed him at the very heart of royal administration. He was not a warrior of legend, but he was a man of sharp intellect and unwavering integrity. He understood that power in Westeros was not just about dragons or armies. It was about who controlled the courts, the writs, and the flow of information. Under Lyonel, House Strong became synonymous with governance. He was known for his fairness, his patience, and his ability to mediate between the crown and the fractious lords of the Riverlands. When Viserys I ascended the throne, Lyonel's counsel became indispensable. He was eventually named Hand of the King, the highest office a common-born lord could achieve. This was the family's high watermark. The Strongs were no longer just a minor Riverlands house. They were now the family of the King's Hand, seated at the right hand of the Iron Throne itself. But governance alone was not the whole of their identity. The Strongs also produced warriors. Lyonel's eldest son, Harwin, was a man of immense physical strength, known throughout the realm as Breakbones. He served in the City Watch of King's Landing, eventually rising to its command. He was a champion in tourneys, a man who could best nearly any opponent in single combat. Where Lyonel brought order through law, Harwin brought it through force. Together, father and son represented the two pillars of stable rule, justice and strength, and both were deeply loyal to the crown. This loyalty, however, drew them ever closer to the royal family itself. Harwin became a constant presence in the court of Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, the king's chosen heir. He served as her sworn shield, her protector, and as rumour would have it, something more. The Strongs were now not just administrators and warriors. They were intimate participants in the most delicate and dangerous game in the Seven Kingdoms, the succession of the Iron Throne. House Strong's identity was built on service. They were practical, ambitious, and deeply connected to the machinery of power. They did not seek glory through conquest or ancient titles. They sought influence through competence, and for a time it worked. They became indispensable to the crown, trusted with the most sensitive matters of state. But in a world where trust is a currency that can be spent only once, that very proximity would soon become their undoing. The same service that lifted them into the light would pull them into the shadow of a fire that would consume everything they had built. It was through this tradition of service and governance that House Strong produced its most respected public figure. a man whose name would become synonymous with order and restraint in the court of King Viserys I. That man was Lyonel Strong. Lyonel was not the first of his house to serve the Iron Throne, but he was the one who elevated the family from a respected Riverlands house to a central pillar of royal administration. His reputation preceded him long before he ever took a seat on the small council. In the Riverlands, he was known as a man of clear judgment, a lord who weighed evidence before passing sentence, who valued the law above personal grievance. This was a rare quality in a region where feuds between houses like the Blackwoods and the Brackens often spilled into bloodshed and petty vengeance. Lyonel Strong stood apart because he believed that the realm could only function when its laws were applied consistently, without favour or fear. His rise to the capital began when King Viserys I, a monarch who prized stability and competence, sought to strengthen his council with men of proven ability. The Master of Law's position had been held by various lords, but the king needed someone who could navigate the growing tensions between the great houses, especially as the succession question began to cast a long shadow over the court. Lyonel Strong was summoned to King's Landing. He accepted the role with a quiet sense of duty. As Master of Laws, Lyonel did not seek to expand his own power or enrich his house through corruption. Instead, he focused on the machinery of justice itself. He oversaw the administration of the king's courts, reviewed petitions from across the realm, and advised Viserys on matters of legal precedent and royal decree. His judgments were measured, his counsel restrained. He understood that the law was not merely a set of commands from the throne, but a living framework that held the seven kingdoms together. In a court where whispers and ambition often drowned out reason, Lyonel Strong became a steady voice for order. His reputation for loyalty to the realm's legal order made him a trusted advisor, but it also placed him in a difficult position. The growing divide between the supporters of Princess Rhaenyra and those who favoured her half-brother Aegon created an atmosphere of suspicion. Lyonel did not take sides publicly. He served the king and he served the law. That was his oath, and he kept it. Yet even as he worked to maintain the stability of the realm, his own house began to attract attention for reasons beyond his control. His eldest son, Harwin, had become a fixture at court, a celebrated knight whose strength was legendary, and it was Harwin's closeness to Princess Rhaenyra that would eventually draw the Strong family into the very heart of the succession crisis. But that story would unfold later. For now, Lyonel Strong remained the calm, capable administrator, the public face of a house that had risen through service rather than conquest. He held the office of Master of Laws with a quiet dignity that earned him the respect of even those who disagreed with him. When the time came for a new hand of the king, it was Lyonel Strong whom Viserys chose to fill that role. But before that elevation, his work as Master of Laws had already secured his place in the history of the realm. He had shown that a man from the Riverlands, without dragon blood or ancient lineage, could stand at the centre of power through nothing more than competence and integrity. And so Lyonel Strong continued his work, unaware that the shadows gathering around his family would soon demand far more than legal wisdom. The next chapter of House Strong would be written not in ink, but in fire. And so the fire came, not from Dragonflame, but from the slow burn of rumour and suspicion that had been smouldering in the Red Keep for years. The whispers about Harwin Strong and Princess Rhaenyra had grown too loud to ignore. Lyonel Strong, the man of law and order, found himself powerless to control the narrative that now defined his house. His son's honour, his own reputation, and the future of his family all hung in the balance. When the king finally acted, it was not with the measured justice that Lyonel had always championed, but with a decision that would send the Strongs back to Harrenhal, back to the seat of their power, and back into the shadows from which they had risen. The tragedy that followed was not a failure of law, but a failure of the human heart. And in the end, House Strong would be remembered not for its service, but for its sacrifice. Lyonel Strong had already proven himself a capable master of laws, a man whose reputation for fairness and steady judgment made him invaluable to King Viserys I. But the court he served was entering a period that would test every ounce of that steadiness. Viserys I inherited a realm at peace, and for many years that peace seemed unshakable. The wounds of the Great Council of 101 were still fresh in the memories of the old lords, but the kingdom had moved on. Trade flourished, the roads were safe, and the Iron Throne sat unchallenged. It was a comfortable peace, the kind that lets a king sleep soundly and a small council focus on matters of law and coin rather than war. Yet beneath that comfort, a question was forming, one that would grow louder with every passing year. Who would sit the Iron Throne after Viserys? The king had no living sons from his first marriage to Queen Amma Arryn. Only one child had survived infancy, Princess Rhaenyra, a bright and determined girl who was named heir in a grand ceremony at the Red Keep. Lords from across the realm knelt and swore oaths to her, promising to uphold her claim. But oaths sworn in times of peace can become brittle when the winds shift. And the winds shifted when Viserys took a second wife, Alicent Hightower, the daughter of his hand, Otto Hightower. Within a few years, Queen Alicent gave birth to sons, Aegon, Aemond and Daeron. Suddenly, the succession was no longer a settled matter. It was a wound waiting to open. Lyonel Strong found himself near the centre of these decisions, not because he sought power, but because his competence demanded it. As Master of Laws, he was responsible for interpreting the precedents that governed inheritance, and the precedent set by the Great Council of 101 was clear. The Iron Throne had passed over a female claimant in favour of a male cousin. That decision, made before Viserys even became king, now cast a long shadow over Rhaenyra's position. Lyonel understood the weight of that precedent, but he also understood the king's will. Viserys had chosen Rhaenyra, and Lyonel served that choice with the same quiet diligence he brought to every matter of state. The court of Viserys I was a place of tournaments and feasts, of dragon flights and royal progresses. It was easy to mistake the laughter and the silk for stability, but Lyonel saw the cracks forming. He watched as factions began to crystallize around the queen and the princess, each side gathering allies, each side whispering doubts about the other's legitimacy. He saw how the king's own reluctance to confront the growing tension allowed the poison to spread slowly, like a stain through wool, and he knew that a peace built on unspoken questions would not hold forever. Lyonel's own position was delicate. He was a man of the Riverlands, not a Valyrian lord, not a member of the ancient houses that dominated the court. His rise had come through service, not blood, that made him both trusted and vulnerable. He could speak plainly to the king because he had no grand ambitions beyond doing his duty. But plain speech in a court of whispers could be dangerous. Still, Lyonel continued to advise, to mediate, to uphold the law as best he could, knowing that the law itself was being stretched by forces far larger than any single man. The comfortable peace of Viserys' reign was real, but it was also fragile. It depended on the king's health, on the patience of the lords, on the hope that the question of succession would somehow resolve itself without bloodshed. Lyonel Strong did not believe in easy resolutions. He had seen enough of politics to know that questions left unanswered do not disappear, they fester, and when they finally break open, they break everything around them. As the years passed, the court grew more divided. The Queen's faction, soon to be called the Greens, gathered around the king's eldest son Aegon. The princess's faction, the Blacks, rallied behind Rhaenyra and her growing family. Lyonel Strong remained in the middle, serving the crown, trying to keep the peace. Even as the peace began to slip through his fingers, he could not stop the coming storm, but he could try to ensure that when it came, the laws and the institutions of the realm would still have some meaning. That was his duty. That was the burden of a man who had risen high enough to see the cracks in the foundation, but not high enough to mend them. The fire that would eventually consume Lyonel and his eldest son Harwin was still years away. For now, the Master of Laws continued his work, drafting decrees, hearing petitions, advising the king on matters of justice and order. He did not know that his own house would become one of the first casualties of the war that was quietly taking shape. He only knew that the peace was comfortable, and that comfort was not the same as safety. King Viserys, the first Targaryen, had ruled for nearly a decade when the question of succession began to press upon him like a slow gathering storm. He had married his cousin Aemma Arryn, and together they had produced several children, but only one survived infancy, a daughter named Rhaenyra. For years Viserys hoped for a son. He needed a son. The Iron Throne had never passed to a woman in its entire history, and the precedents of the Great Council of 101, which had chosen Viserys himself over his cousin, Lyonel Velaryon, had affirmed that the crown should descend through the male line. But the gods did not grant Viserys a living son by Aemma. When she died in childbirth, along with the boy Balon, the king was left with only Rhaenyra as his direct heir. And so, in the year 105 after the conquest, King Viserys made a decision that would ripple through the ages. He summoned the lords of the Seven Kingdoms to the Red Keep, and before them all, he named his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir. He declared her the Princess of Dragonstone, the traditional title for the heir to the Iron Throne, and he required every lord and lady present to swear fealty to her. They knelt, they spoke the words, and for a time the realm accepted this new order. But the choice, unsettled traditions of male inheritance that ran deep across Westeros, in the north, in the Reach, in the Stormlands, in every corner of the continent, the law and custom held that a son inherited before a daughter, and a daughter before an uncle. The Great Council of 101 had set a clear precedent. The Iron Throne could not pass to a woman, nor through a woman to her male descendants. Viserys was effectively overturning that precedent by naming Rhaenyra as his heir, and he did so while knowing that his own younger brother, Daemon, had been the presumptive heir for years. Daemon was a controversial figure, but he was male. Many lords expected that Daemon would eventually inherit, or that Viserys would remarry and produce a son. And indeed Viserys did remarry. He took Alicent Hightower as his queen, the daughter of his hand, Otto Hightower. Within a year, Alicent gave birth to a son, Aegon, then another son, Aemond, then a daughter, Helena. The king now had male heirs of his own body, yet he refused to alter his decision. He kept Rhaenyra as his heir, even as his sons grew older, and the court began to divide into factions. Those who believed in the old traditions looked to Aegon as the rightful king. Those who had sworn oaths to Rhaenyra looked to her, and the king, who desired above all else to keep the peace, tried to hold both sides together with words and promises. It was in this tense and fragile court that Lyonel Strong served. Lyonel had been Master of Laws under Viserys for years, and he had earned a reputation for competence, fairness, and quiet wisdom. He was not a man of grand speeches or dramatic gestures. He was a man of the law, of procedure, of careful administration, and he understood better than most that the king's desire for harmony could not erase dynastic tension. Viserys wanted everyone to get along. He wanted his daughter to be accepted. He wanted his sons to respect her. He wanted the lords to keep their oaths. But the law and the tradition were at war with the king's will, and no amount of pleasant words could reconcile them. Lyonel Strong saw this clearly. He had been present at the Great Council of 101. He knew the weight of that precedent. He also knew that the king's decision to name Rhaenyra heir was legally valid, because the king's word was law. But law without acceptance is fragile, and when the king's own sons grew into men who might claim the throne themselves, the fragility became danger. Yet Lyonel did not oppose the king. He served Viserys faithfully, offering counsel when asked, and remaining silent when silence was the wiser course. He was not a man to pick sides in a succession dispute before it became necessary. He was a man of the realm, a man of the Riverlands, a man who had risen through service rather than blood. His loyalty was to the crown, not to any faction. And so he watched as the seeds of the Dance of the Dragons were sown in the very court where he stood. The king's decision to name Rhaenyra heir was not a simple act of love for his daughter. It was a political choice that defied centuries of tradition, and it placed the entire realm on a knife's edge. Lyonel Strong, as Hand of the King after Otto Hightower's dismissal, would have to navigate that edge every day. He would have to advise a king who wanted peace but could not achieve it, and he would have to do so while his own family became entangled in the very scandals and suspicions that the succession crisis would breed. For now, in the years after Rhaenyra was named heir, the court remained outwardly calm. Tournaments were held, marriages were arranged. The king smiled and feasted and hoped, but beneath the surface, the question of who would sit the Iron Throne after Viserys grew sharper with each passing year, and Lyonel Strong, the son of a minor Riverlands house, found himself standing at the centre of that question, holding the scales of law and loyalty as best he could. The king's desire for harmony was sincere, but harmony, like a castle built on shifting ground, cannot stand forever. And when the ground began to tremble, it was not the king who would feel the first tremor, but those closest to him, among them the Strongs. The decision to name Rhaenyra Targaryen heir to the Iron Throne sent a tremor through the court of King Viserys I. It was not a quiet decision, nor one made in haste. Viserys had weighed the traditions of male inheritance, the precedents set by the Great Council of 101, and the fragile peace of the realm, and he had chosen his daughter. For a time, the court held its breath, waiting to see how the king's hand, Otto Hightower, would respond. Otto had served Viserys faithfully for years, guiding the realm through the comfortable peace that marked the early decades of the king's reign. But the naming of Rhaenyra as heir was a wound that would not heal. Otto Hightower was a man of order, of precedent, of the careful architecture of succession that had kept the Seven Kingdoms stable since the conquest. He had seen the chaos that could follow an unclear line of inheritance, the wars that could erupt when ambition found a crack in the foundation, and in his eyes, Rhaenyra was that crack, not because she was unworthy, but because she was a woman in a world that had never accepted a ruling queen. Otto's warnings began softly, almost as counsel. He reminded Viserys of the Great Council, of the 1,000 lords who had chosen a male claimant over a female one. He spoke of the lords of Westeros, of their stubborn attachment, tradition, of the whispers that would follow any attempt to place a woman on the throne. At first, these warnings seemed reasonable, the prudent advice of a seasoned hand who had the realm's stability at heart. But as the months passed, the tone of Otto's counsel shifted. He began to speak not of the realm's fears, but of Rhaenyra herself. He questioned her companions, her choices, her fitness to rule. He pointed to her friendship with Sir Harwin Strong, the eldest son of his own Master of Laws, Lyonel Strong. He suggested that the princess was too willful, too close to men who might use her for their own ambitions. And here the court began to notice something else. Otto Hightower's daughter, Alicent, had become a close companion to the king after the death of Queen Emma, and Otto himself had begun to speak of the importance of a male heir, of the need for Viserys to remarry and produce a son who could unite the realm. The line between counsel and self-interest grew thin. Viserys was not a fool. He saw what others saw, that Otto's warnings about Rhaenyra were also warnings about his own position. If Rhaenyra were set aside, the next heir would be the king's son, if he had one, and if that son were born of Alicent Hightower, then Otto would be grandfather to a king. The hand's loyalty to the realm began to look like loyalty to his own house. The king grew weary of the constant pressure, the subtle reminders, the veiled threats of instability. He needed a hand who would serve the throne without serving himself, and so Viserys turned his gaze to Lyonel Strong. Lyonel had served as Master of Laws for years, a man known for his competence, his fairness, and his quiet dedication to the order of the realm. He had never sought power for its own sake. He had never whispered in corners or cultivated factions. He was a steady hand in a court that was beginning to tremble. When Viserys asked Lyonel to become his hand, it was a signal to the realm that the king would not be swayed by the ambitions of the Hightowers. It was a choice for stability over intrigue, for law over blood. Otto Hightower was dismissed from his position, sent back to Old Town with the title of Hand still echoing in his ears. He left the capital with bitterness, but also with patience. He knew that the game was not over, that the succession was still a wound, and that wounds fester. But for now, the king had chosen his path, and Lyonel Strong stood beside him, ready to serve the crown as he had always served the law. The fall of Otto Hightower was not the end of the conflict, but it was a turning point. A moment when the court chose order over ambition, at least for a little while, and in that choice, House Strong rose to its greatest height, standing at the right hand of the king, unaware of the fire that would one day consume them. With Otto Hightower dismissed from the Hand's office, King Viserys needed a replacement who could restore order to a court frayed by factionalism. He turned to the one man who had consistently offered measured counsel without personal ambition, Lord Lyonel Strong. This appointment marked the highest point House Strong would ever reach, a moment when a Riverlands family of administrators and lawyers stepped into the very centre of royal government. Lyonel Strong was not a warrior lord from an ancient bloodline. His family had risen through generations of service, first as stewards and castellans, then as masters of law and justice. They held lands in the Riverlands, but their real strength lay in their understanding of how power actually worked in Westeros. Through dragons or conquest, but through the slow accumulation of trust, competence, and proximity to the throne. When Lyonel became Hand, he brought that understanding to bear on a kingdom already beginning to fracture. The king's decision was widely seen as a wise one. Lyonel was known for his fairness, his patience, and his refusal to take sides in the growing rivalry between Rhaenyra's supporters and those who whispered that a woman could never sit the Iron Throne. He did not inflame tensions, he tried to contain them. He advised Viserys to keep the peace, to avoid forcing the realm into a choice it was not ready to make. But even a careful hand cannot stop the currents of history from pulling against him. While Lyonel governed with steady hands, dangerous rivalries were forming just outside his chambers. Queen Alicent, once Rhaenyra's closest friend, had become her most determined opponent. The children of the king's second marriage were being raised to see their half-sister as a threat, and within the Red Keep, whispers about Rhaenyra's son, about their brown hair, their pug noses, their resemblance to a certain knight of the Kingsguard, were growing louder. That knight was Sir Harwin Strong, Lyonel's own eldest son. Harwin was everything his father was not: bold, physical, and dangerously visible. He had earned the name Breakbones for his feats of strength in tournaments and battles, but his true fame came from his closeness to Princess Rhaenyra. The rumours that he fathered her 3 eldest children were never proven, but they spread through court like fire through dry grass. For Lyonel, this was a political catastrophe. His son's private life threatened to undo everything the Hand had built. Yet Lyonel did not resign. He did not distance himself from Harwin. He continued to serve the king with the same quiet diligence, hoping that time and discretion would let the scandal fade. But the court of Viserys I was no place for quiet hopes. The seeds of civil war had already been planted, and House Strong stood directly in the path of the coming storm. As Lyonel sat in the small council chamber, weighing each word before he spoke, the realm's future was being decided elsewhere, in the bedchambers of the Queen, in the letters exchanged between lords, in the growing certainty that war was inevitable. The Hand's careful governance could delay the conflict, but it could not prevent it, and soon a tragic Harrenhal would remove Lyonel Strong from the board entirely, leaving his younger son, Larys, to navigate the chaos that followed. The tragedy at Harrenhal came without warning, though in hindsight, the signs were there. Harwin Strong had been sent to his family's ancestral seat to oversee matters of inheritance and administration, a routine duty for the heir to a great house, but the journey was also a convenient excuse to remove him from King's Landing. To quiet the whispers that followed him like a shadow, Lord Lyonel accompanied his son, perhaps to offer counsel, perhaps to ensure that the rumours would not follow them into the Riverlands. They arrived at Harrenhal on a cool evening, the monstrous towers of the cursed castle looming above them. The castle had never been a welcoming place. Its walls were built by Harren the Black with the blood of thousands, and it had been burned by dragonfire, cursed by the gods, and haunted by the memory of ruin. That night a fire broke out in the Tower of Ghosts. No one ever proved how it started. Some said it was an accident, a candle knocked over by a careless servant. Others whispered that it was arson, that someone in the Red Keep had decided that the Strongs had become too dangerous to leave alive. The flames spread quickly through the dry stone corridors, and by the time the guards realised what was happening, the upper floors were already engulfed. Lord Lyonel and Sir Harwin were trapped in their chambers. They died together, father and son, the hand of the king and the knight, who had been called Breakbones. Their bodies were found locked in an embrace. As if Harwin had tried to shield his father from the smoke, the news reached King's Landing within days, and the court was stunned into silence. King Viserys wept openly in the throne room, mourning the loss of the most loyal servant he had ever known. Queen Alicent offered public condolences, but her eyes betrayed no grief. And in the shadows of the Red Keep, Larys Strong, younger son who had always been overlooked, began to move. Larys was called Clubfoot because of his twisted foot, a deformity that had kept him from knighthood and from the martial glory his brother had enjoyed. But Larys had other talents. He was a master of whispers, of secrets, of the hidden networks that ran beneath the surface of court life. He had been his father's confidant in many things, and he knew more about the intrigues of the Red Keep than almost anyone suspected. When he heard of the fire at Harrenhal, he did not weep, he did not rage. He simply began to gather information. He knew that the fire had been no accident. He knew that the order had come from someone close to the throne, and he knew that to survive, he would have to play a game far more dangerous than any his father had ever played. Larys Strong did not seek revenge, he sought power, and in the chaos that followed the deaths of his father and brother, he found his opportunity. He ingratiated himself with Queen Alicent, offering her the very secrets that could destroy her enemies. He became her most trusted informant, the spider in the corner of the web, and he watched as the realm slid closer to war, knowing that his own survival depended on staying one step ahead of everyone else. The tragedy at Harrenhal did not just end the lives of two men. It removed the last voice of moderation from the small council. With Lyonel Strong gone, there was no one left to counsel patience, no one to remind the king that peace was worth preserving. The court became a battlefield of whispers, and the seeds of the Dance of the Dragons were watered with the tears of House Strong. Larys Clubfoot would go on to become Master of Whisperers, a position that suited his talents perfectly. He would serve Queen Alicent, and later King Aegon II, always in the shadows, always with a smile that never reached his eyes. But he never forgot the night his father and brother burned, and in the end, the fire at Harrenhal would prove to be the first true spark of a war that would consume the Seven Kingdoms. When Lyonel Strong accepted the position of Hand of the King, he also accepted a seat that would define his house for generations to come. That seat was Harrenhal, the largest castle in all the Riverlands, a fortress of colossal scale built by the Ironborn King Harren the Black, had long been a prize that tempted and destroyed every family that claimed it. House Towers had held it after the Targaryen conquest, but they faded into obscurity. Then House Carys, then House Harroway, then House Towers again, each dynasty crumbling under the weight of the castle's curse. And now, by the grace of King Viserys I, Harrenhal would pass to House Strong. The acquisition was not a conquest. Lyonel Strong did not march an army through the gates or win the castle in battle, was granted it. The previous lord, a man of House Towers, had died without clear heirs, and the crown had the right to bestow the castle as it saw fit. King Viserys, grateful for Lyonel's steady hand as Master of Laws, and now as Hand of the King, saw an opportunity to reward his most capable servant, and so the Strongs, a family that had risen through legal acumen and administrative skill, suddenly found themselves lords of the most imposing fortress in the Riverlands. But to control Harrenhal was to inherit more than stone and timber. It was to inherit a legacy of ruin. The castle had been built by Harren the Black in a fit of megalomania, its towers so tall they seemed to scrape the sky, its walls so thick that no siege engine could breach them. Yet when Aegon the Conqueror came, Harren's pride became his tomb. The castle was no defence against dragonfire. Harren and his sons burned alive within their own walls, and the castle has never shaken the memory of that inferno. Every family that took Harrenhal afterward seemed to suffer a similar fate. They died out, were attainted, or were consumed by the very ambition the castle inspired. It was as if the stones themselves remembered the fire and passed that memory on to those who dared to rule there. Lyonel Strong understood this. He was a man of law and order, not of reckless ambition. When he accepted Harrenhal, he did so with the quiet gravity of someone who knows that power is not a gift, but a test. He moved his household from their ancestral keep, a modest stronghold somewhere in the Riverlands, into the vast, echoing halls of Harrenhal. The castle was too large for any single family to truly occupy. Whole wings stood empty, their corridors dark and silent. The great hall could seat hundreds, but the Strongs were a small house. They rattled around in that enormous fortress like a handful of pebbles in a giant's fist. Yet the political weight of controlling Harrenhal was immense. The castle sat at the crossroads of the Riverlands, commanding the lands around the God's Eye Lake. Whoever held Harrenhal could project power over the entire region. It was a symbol of royal favour, a sign that the crown trusted House Strong to keep the Riverlands in order. For a family that had only recently risen from relative obscurity, this was an extraordinary elevation. The Strongs were no longer just respected advisors. They were landed lords of the highest rank, equal in title to the ancient houses of the Trident. But there was an irony that could not be ignored. House Strong reached its height by inheriting a place haunted by fallen dynasties. Every stone of Harrenhal was a reminder that greatness often precedes a fall. The castle had seen the end of House Hoare, House Corys, House Harroway, and House Towers. Each had risen, flourished for a time, and then vanished. Now it was the Strongs' turn to hold the keys. Lyonel must have known that the castle's history was a warning. He was a careful man, a man who had built his reputation on competence and moderation. Perhaps he believed that he could break the cycle, that his steady hand could tame the curse. But the curse of Harrenhal is not a supernatural force. It is the weight of expectation, the temptation of power, and the vulnerability that comes with being the most visible target in the Riverlands. For a time, Lyonel's tenure at Harrenhal seemed stable. He continued his duties as Hand of the King in King's Landing, travelling back and forth between the capital and his new seat. His eldest son, Harwin, remained at court, serving as a commander in the City Watch and becoming a familiar figure in the Red Keep. His younger son, Larys, stayed closer to Harrenhal, managing the castle's affairs. The family was spread thin, but they were united in purpose. They had risen through service, and they intended to stay through loyalty. Yet even as Lyonel settled into Harrenhal, the seeds of his house's destruction were being sown in the Red Keep. The question of succession, the rumours about Rhaenyra's children, the simmering resentment of the Hightowers, all of it was building toward a storm that would eventually engulf the Strongs. For now, though the castle stood silent, its great towers casting long shadows over the Riverlands, and Lyonel Strong, Lord of Harrenhal and Hand of the King, believed that he had finally secured his family's future. He could not see that the walls he now called home had a way of outlasting every family that tried to hold them. Lord Lyonel Strong had secured his place at the heart of the realm. He was Hand of the King, Master of Laws and Governance, and now Lord of Harrenhal. But a man's legacy is not written in his own deeds alone. It is written in his children. And Lyonel Strong had 2 sons, each as different from the other as fire is from stone. The elder son was Sir Harwin Strong, and if you have heard one name whispered in the corridors of the Red Keep, it is his. Harwin was not a man of books or courtly manoeuvring. He was a man of action, of muscle, of raw and undeniable physical power. Throughout the 7 kingdoms, he was known by a single title that spoke louder than any lordship: Breakbones. It was a name earned in the tourney yard, in the melee, in the countless contests of strength that defined the martial culture of Westeros. Men, said Harwin Strong, could bend a horseshoe with his bare hands. They said he could lift a man in full plate armour over his head and throw him across a field. And these were not exaggerations. He was the strongest knight of his generation, perhaps the strongest the realm had seen in decades. But Harwin was more than just a brute in armour. He served as a sworn shield to Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, the heir to the Iron Throne. And it was in this service that his life became entwined with the great tragedy of the age. He was often at her side, a towering figure in white cloak and silvered steel, his presence a quiet reassurance in a court that was growing ever more divided. Yet it was this very closeness that would become the source of the most dangerous rumour in the realm. Whispers began to spread that Harwin Strong was more than just a protector to the princess. The whispers said he was the true father of her sons. Now we must tread carefully here. The official record, the one written by maesters and preserved in the citadel, states that Rhaenyra's 3 eldest sons, Jacaerys, Lucerys and Joffrey, were the children of her husband, Sir First Velaryon. But the eyes of the court saw what they saw. The boys had brown hair, brown eyes, and the strong features of the Riverlands. They did not look like Lyonel Velaryon, who was pale-haired and silver of complexion. They looked like Harwin Strong, and in a world where bloodlines determined the right to rule, such a resemblance was not merely gossip, it was a political weapon. Harwin himself was not a man for secrets. He was direct, honest, and perhaps too proud of his strength to bother with the subtle arts of deception. But his presence in the princess's life was a constant source of tension, and it was a tension that would eventually demand a price. Then there was the younger son, Larys Strong. If Harwin was the hammer, Larys was the shadow. Where his brother was broad and loud, Larys was slender and quiet. He did not train in the yard. He did not seek glory in the lists. He was often seen in the corners of the court, watching, listening, saying very little. His manner was soft, almost unassuming, but those who paid close attention noticed something in his eyes, a stillness, a patience, the look of a man who was always calculating. Larys Strong was not a warrior. He did not need to be. His battlefield was the mind, and his weapons were secrets. He understood that in the Game of Thrones, the most dangerous blows are not struck with steel. They are struck with information, a word spoken at the right moment, a letter delivered to the wrong hands, a whisper that grows into a roar. Larys had a gift for gathering such things. He knew who owed whom. He knew who feared whom. And he knew that in a court full of dragons, the man who held the secrets held the real power. The contrast between the 2 brothers could not have been more stark. Harwin was the face of House Strong, the strong arm, the visible champion, the man whose name was spoken with awe in every tavern from King's Landing to the Wall. Larys was the hidden hand, the one who worked in the spaces between words, the one who understood that the most enduring power is the kind no one sees coming. Harwin inspired loyalty through his presence. Larys inspired unease through his silence. One was built for the battlefield, the other was built for the shadows. And yet they were both sons of Lyonel Strong. They were both heirs to the legacy of a house that had risen from the Riverlands to the very steps of the Iron Throne. But the path they walked was already diverging. Harwin's strength would draw him into the brightest and most dangerous light. Larys's subtlety would lead him into the darkest corners of the realm. For now, The court of King Viserys I continued its uneasy peace. The king grew older, his health failing, his grip on the realm loosening with each passing year. The factions were forming. The Greens and the Blacks were sharpening their knives, not yet ready to draw blood, but preparing. And in the midst of it all, the strong stood at a crossroads. Lyonel, the father the Hand, the Lord of Harrenhal, tried to hold the centre, but his sons were already moving in opposite directions. Harwin's loyalty to Rhaenyra was absolute. He would not abandon her, no matter the cost. And Larys was watching. He was always watching, and he was beginning to see that in the chaos to come, there would be opportunities for those who knew how to wait. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. In the previous chapter, we met the sons of Lyonel Strong, and of those two brothers, it was the elder who first caught the attention of the realm. Sir Harwin Strong was not a man who could be easily overlooked, and not simply because of his name or his father's rising station. Harwin was, by every account, a force of nature, a knight whose physical presence seemed to fill any room he entered. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to strain the fabric of his tunic, and arms that had earned him a reputation long before he ever set foot in the capital. They called him Breakbones, and the name was not given lightly. In the tawny yards of the Riverlands, and later in the lists of King's Landing, Harwin Strong had a habit of leaving his opponents bruised, battered, and sometimes carried from the field. He was not a cruel man, but he was a powerful one, and in the world of Westerosi knighthood, power was its own kind of language. But Harwin was more than just a tournament champion. When his father Lyonel became Hand of the King, Harwin was given a position that suited his talents and his temperament. He was appointed to the City Watch of King's Landing, the Gold Cloaks who kept the peace in the sprawling, often lawless streets of the capital. And in that role, Harwin Breakbones truly came into his own. The City Watch had long been a force of uneven quality, sometimes effective, sometimes corrupt, but under Harwin's command, it gained a new kind of discipline. He was not a man who inspired loyalty through speeches or charm, but through sheer presence. When Harwin walked the streets of Flea Bottom, the thieves and cutthroats knew to step aside. When he led a patrol through the night markets, the brawls seemed to quiet before they began. His reputation preceded him, and that reputation was built on something tangible. He had broken the arms of men who thought themselves unbeatable. He had wrestled down drunkards twice his age and sent them to the cells with nothing more than a stern word and a firm grip. He was in every sense the embodiment of the law's iron fist. And yet, for all his strength, it was not his skill with a sword or his command of the gold cloaks that would make Harwin Strong unforgettable. It was his presence at court, and the way that presence drew the eye of someone far above his station. King's Landing in the years of Viserys I was a place of delicate politics, where every glance and every whisper carried weight. And Harwin, despite his size and his martial reputation, was not a man of subtlety. He wore his emotions openly, his loyalties plainly, and his affections without disguise. When he stood in the great hall of the Red Keep, he did not shrink into the shadows. He stood tall, his dark hair falling past his shoulders, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the dais where the royal family held court. And more often than not, those eyes would settle on the princess, Rhaenyra Targaryen. It was impossible to ignore. The way Harwin looked at her, the way he seemed to gravitate toward her presence at feasts and councils, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. Courtiers noticed, the Queen noticed, and most importantly, the King's small council noticed. Harwin Strong was not a man who could hide his feelings, and in a court built on secrets and alliances, that transparency was both his greatest strength and his most dangerous weakness. He was the kind of knight that songs were written about. But he was also a man who stood too close to a flame that could burn him. The scandal, when it came, did not arrive with a single dramatic event. It grew slowly, like a vine creeping up the walls of a tower, unnoticed until it had already taken root. Harwin's presence at Rhaenyra's side became more frequent. He was seen accompanying her on rides through the Kingswood, standing guard at her chambers, whispering with her in the shadows of the Godswood. And when Rhaenyra's children were born, first Jacaerys, then Lucerys, then Joffrey, the whispers grew louder. The boys had brown hair, brown eyes, and features that resembled no Velaryon who had ever lived. They looked like Harwin Strong. They looked like Breakbones. The realm began to talk. Not openly, not in the throne room or the council chambers, but in the corridors and the taverns, and the gardens where secrets were traded like coin. The paternity of Rhaenyra's sons became the worst kept secret in Westeros, and at the centre of that secret stood Harwin Strong, the knight who could break bones but could not break the chains of rumour. His reputation, once a source of pride, now became a burden. Every time he walked through the court, every time he lifted one of the boys onto his shoulders, every time he stood too close to the princess, he was feeding the fire that would eventually consume his family, and yet he could not stop. That was the tragedy of Harwin Breakbones. He was a man of action, not of calculation. He loved openly, fought fiercely, and served loyally. But in the Game of Thrones, those qualities are often the most dangerous. His strength drew him to Rhaenyra, and his devotion kept him there, even as the walls of suspicion closed in around them. He was the knight who could have been a legend, if only he had been born into a quieter time. But he was born into the Dance of the Dragons, and his story was already being written in fire. As the rumours grew, so did the tension within the royal court. The Queen, Alicent Hightower, watched the relationship between Harwin and Rhaenyra with cold, calculating eyes. She saw the way the princess's children favoured the strong blood, and she saw an opportunity. The seeds of conflict were being sown, and Harwin Strong, for all his physical power, was powerless to stop them. He could break bones, but he could not break the whispers. He could command the gold cloaks, but he could not command the truth. And the truth, as it always does, was beginning to surface. The path ahead for Harwin would lead him away from the capital, away from the woman he loved, and toward a fate that would echo through the ages. But before that, there was still the matter of his father, Lyonel, and the burden of Harrenhal. The castle that had become the seat of House Strong was a place of shadows and curses, and it was there that the next chapter of this story would unfold. By the time Sir Harwin Strong had established himself as a commander in the City Watch, King's Landing had begun to feel the first stirrings of a change in the air. Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen was no longer the girl who had flown Syrax above the dragon pit with reckless joy. She was a woman now, and the court was watching her with a new kind of attention. The transition from princess to heir apparent had been formalised years before, but the weight of it was only now settling upon her shoulders. She was 17 years old in the year 114, after Aegon's conquest, and the realm was beginning to measure her every move. The Red Keep, for all its grandeur, had become a gilded cage. Rhaenyra had always been spirited, even headstrong, but as she entered adulthood, the expectations placed upon her grew heavier. The small council, the lords of the realm, and most of all her father, King Viserys I, all had a vision of what a princess should be. She was to be dignified, composed, and above all, a symbol of unity for a kingdom that was already fracturing beneath the surface. But Rhaenyra had never been content to simply sit and be admired. She craved action, purpose, and the kind of freedom that her father had promised her when he named her heir, but which the court seemed determined to deny her. It was in this restless state that she found herself drawn to the streets of King's Landing. The city was a living, breathing entity, far removed from the polished halls of the Red Keep. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also real, and in the company of her uncle, Daemon Targaryen, she had learned to navigate its shadows. But Daemon was often away, and Rhaenyra needed someone she could trust. someone who could move through the city with authority, and yet remain loyal to her alone. That someone was Harwin Strong. Harwin had become a fixture of the city watch, but his duties extended beyond the simple enforcement of law. He was a protector, a man whose presence commanded respect and whose reputation preceded him. The small folk called him Breakbones, not out of fear, but out of a grudging admiration for his strength and his sense of justice. He was not a man who abused his power. He was a man who used it to keep order, and in a city as chaotic as King's Landing, that made him invaluable. Rhaenyra began to notice him more often. At first, it was simply his proximity. He was often near the Red Keep, coordinating patrols or attending to matters that required the king's attention. But soon, their paths crossed with increasing frequency. She would see him in the training yard, where his skill with a sword was unmatched. She would hear his name mentioned in council meetings, always with a tone of respect, and she would feel his eyes on her when she rode through the city, a silent assurance that she was not alone. It was not long before Harwin was assigned to her personal guard. The official reason was that the princess needed reliable protection during her excursions beyond the castle walls. But the truth was more complicated. Rhaenyra had requested him. She had asked her father to place Harwin Strong among her sworn shields, and King Viserys, ever indulgent of his daughter's wishes, had agreed. The arrangement suited both of them. For Rhaenyra, Harwin was a bridge to the world she longed to explore. He knew the city intimately, every alley, every tavern, every hidden corner where trouble might lurk. He could take her to places where she could breathe, where she could be herself, without the suffocating gaze of the court. And for Harwin, the princess was a charge he took seriously. But she was also something more. She was a kindred spirit, someone who understood the burden of expectations and the desire to break free from them. Their relationship was not romantic at first. It was built on trust, on the simple understanding that they could rely on each other. Harwin was not a man of many words, but his actions spoke volumes. He stood between Rhaenyra and any threat, whether real or imagined. He listened to her complaints about the court, her frustrations with her father, her fears about the future, and in return, she gave him something he had never expected: a confidence. The court, of course, noticed. Whispers began to circulate, as they always did. Some said that the princess was too familiar with a common knight, even one as accomplished as Harwin Strong. Others noted that he was the son of the hand of the king, which made the connection politically significant. But the rumours were careful, guarded. No one dared to speak openly against the princess, not while King Viserys still lived and ruled. For Rhaenyra, the attention was both a comfort and a constraint. She valued Harwin's presence, but she knew that every moment they spent together was being observed, catalogued, and judged. The freedom she sought was elusive, always just out of reach. She could ride through the city, she could walk among the people, but she could never escape the fact that she was the heir to the Iron Throne, and that meant that her choices were never truly her own. Harwin understood this better than most. He had grown up in the shadow of his father's ambition, and he knew the price of proximity to power. He did not seek to exploit his position. He simply wanted to protect her, to give her what small measure of freedom he could. And so he continued to serve, to watch and to wait. The City Watch became Rhaenyra's window into the world, beyond the Red Keep. Under Harwin's guidance, she learned to read the city's moods, to understand its dangers, and to appreciate its resilience. She saw the poverty of Flea Bottom, the bustling markets of the Street of Steel, the quiet dignity of the septs and the taverns, and she saw the men who kept the peace, the gold cloaks who walked the streets day and night, often at great personal risk. Harwin was their leader, but he was also their example. He did not ask his men to do anything he would not do himself. He patrolled alongside them, shared their hardships, and earned their loyalty through deeds, not words. Rhaenyra watched him with a growing admiration, not just for his strength, but for his character. In a court full of schemers and flatterers, Harwin Strong was a man of substance, and yet the world was changing around them. The succession crisis that had simmered for years was beginning to boil. King Viserys' health was declining, and the factions at court were sharpening their knives. The Greens, led by Queen Alicent and her father Otto Hightower, were positioning themselves for a conflict that many saw as inevitable, and the Blacks, loyal to Rhaenyra, were gathering their own forces. In the midst of this gathering storm, Harwin Strong remained a steady presence. He was not a politician. He was not a schemer. He was a knight, a protector, and a friend. And as Rhaenyra's world grew more complicated, she clung to that stability, even as she knew that it could not last. The nights in King's Landing were long and quiet, broken only by the distant sounds of the city. Rhaenyra would often stand on her balcony, looking out over the rooftops and the winding streets, feeling the weight of the crown that would one day be hers. And somewhere below, in the shadows of the city watch, Harwin Strong was watching over her, as he had promised he would. Their bond was forged in those quiet moments, in the spaces between duty and desire. It was not yet love, not in the way the songs described, but it was something deeper, something rooted in trust and understanding. And in the world of the Red Keep, where every word was a weapon and every glance a threat, that was a rare and precious thing. As the years passed, Rhaenyra would come to rely on Harwin more and more. He would become her confidant, her protector, and eventually the father of her children. But that story was still unwritten. For now, there was only the city, the watch, and the quiet bond between a princess and her knight. And the court watched and waited and wondered what would come of it. By the time Rhaenyra Targaryen came of age, the court of King Viserys I had become a place of watchful silences and whispered calculations. The princess herself had grown into a figure of restless energy, a young woman who understood the weight of her position, but chafed against its constraints. She had found moments of freedom in the company of the city watch, among men who moved through the streets of King's Landing, with a directness that the Red Keep never allowed. But the realm does not permit its heirs to remain unbound for long, and the question of Rhaenyra's future had become the most pressing matter in the Seven Kingdoms. A princess must marry, and a named heir to the Iron Throne must marry strategically. The match that emerged from the councils of the small council and the private consultations of the king was one that seemed, on paper, to be perfect. Sir Lyonel Velaryon was the son and heir of Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake, master of Driftmark and commander of the greatest fleet in the known world. House Velaryon was ancient, proud, and wealthy beyond measure. Their ships carried silks and spices from the far corners of Essos. Their coffers rivaled those of the Lannisters, and they possessed something that no other house in Westeros could offer: dragons. The marriage of Rhaenyra Targaryen to Lyonel Velaryon was meant to be a union of the two great dragon-riding houses of the realm. The Targaryens had conquered Westeros on Dragonback, but the Velaryons had been their closest allies from the beginning, sharing blood and fire for generations. Lyonel himself rode the dragon Seasmoke, a sleek grey beast whose speed and agility were the envy of the Dragon Keepers. By joining their lines, the crown hoped to secure the succession with an unbreakable bond of blood, wealth, and military power. The match would unite dragons and ships, gold and legitimacy, creating a dynasty that no rival could challenge. The wedding itself was a grand affair, held in the great sept of Baelor, with all the pageantry the crown could muster. Lords and ladies from across the realm gathered to witness the ceremony, and the celebration stretched on for days. There were feasts and tourneys, dances and processions. The city of King's Landing was draped in the colours of both houses, black and red, intertwined with seahorse blue and silver. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the realm had found a moment of unity, a shared hope that the future would be peaceful and secure. But the public spectacle of the wedding masked a private reality that was far more complicated. Sir Lyonel Velaryon was a capable knight and a skilled dragon rider, but his heart was not in the marriage. He was known to prefer the company of men, a fact that was an open secret among those who moved in the circles of the court. The marriage was a political arrangement, a contract signed in the name of dynasty and duty, and both Rhaenyra and Lyonel understood this. They performed their roles with grace, appearing together at court functions and public events. But behind the closed doors of their chambers, there was distance. The marriage was not consummated in the way that the realm expected. There were no shared nights of passion, no whispered intimacies between husband and wife. Instead, there was a careful arrangement, a mutual understanding that their union was a matter of state, not of love. Rhaenyra and Lyonel became friends, allies in the Game of Thrones, but they were never truly partners in the way that the small council had hoped. And in a court where every glance was observed and every whisper carried, this distance did not go unnoticed. It was in this space of private separation that the rumours began to take root. The court had long watched the interactions between Princess Rhaenyra and Sir Harwin Strong, the commander of the city watch known as Breakbones. Harwin was a man of immense physical presence, broad-shouldered and powerful, with a reputation for strength that was matched only by his loyalty to the princess. He had been a constant presence in Rhaenyra's life since her youth, and their connection had deepened as she entered adulthood. They were often seen together, speaking in low voices, sharing glances that lingered a moment too long. The whispers grew louder after the marriage. People began to notice that Rhaenyra's sons, born in the years that followed, bore little resemblance to their legal father. Viserys, Lyonel, and Joffrey Velaryon had the brown hair and brown eyes of the Strongs, not the silver gold hair and violet eyes of the Targaryens and Velaryons. The physical evidence was impossible to ignore, and the court began to murmur. The children were called the Strong Boys in private, a name that carried both mockery and accusation. The rumours spread from the Red Keep to the streets of King's Landing, and from there to every corner of the realm. The marriage to House Velaryon had been designed to unite the realm's greatest powers, to forge a bond that would secure the succession for generations. Instead, it created a fracture that would never fully heal. The distance between Rhaenyra and Lyonel left room for whispers, and those whispers grew into a storm that would eventually shake the foundations of the Iron Throne. The union of dragons and ships, wealth and legitimacy, had been built on a foundation of political necessity, but it could not withstand the weight of human desire and human ambition. And as the years passed, the cracks in that foundation became impossible to hide. The marriage between Rhaenyra Targaryen and Sir Lyonel Velaryon was meant to be a union of strength. It brought together the heir to the Iron Throne and the heir to the richest house in the realm, binding dragons to ships, Targaryen fire to Velaryon silver, and the legitimacy of the crown to the wealth of the narrow sea. For a time, the court at King's Landing allowed its be the whispers that had followed the princess since her youth. But the court was never a place where whispers stayed quiet for long. Within a year of the wedding, Rhaenyra announced that she was with child. The news was greeted with formal congratulations, but beneath the courtesies, there was a current of unease. Everyone knew that Sir Lyonel Velaryon preferred the company of men. Everyone knew that the marriage had been arranged for political necessity, not personal affection, and everyone knew that the princess had grown close to a certain knight of the city watch, a man whose reputation for strength was matched only by his proximity to the royal family. That knight was Sir Harwin Strong, the eldest son of Lord Lyonel Strong, the Hand of the King. Harwin was a giant of a man, broad-shouldered and powerful, known throughout the realm as Breakbones for his feats in the tourney yard and his fearsome reputation as a commander of the Gold Cloaks. He was often seen in the princess's company, and the court had long since begun to murmur about the nature of their relationship. But murmurs are not accusations, and in the Red Keep, the most dangerous words are the ones that are never spoken aloud. When the time came, Rhaenyra gave birth to a healthy son. He was named Viserys, a name that honoured both Targaryen and Velaryon traditions, and he was presented to the court as the heir to Driftmark and the future king of the Seven Kingdoms. The celebrations were proper and restrained, as befitted the birth of a royal prince. But as the infant was shown to the lords and ladies of the court, a silence fell over the hall. It was not the silence of awe or reverence. It was the silence of recognition. The boy had dark hair, not the silver gold of the Targaryens, not the pale platinum of the Velaryons. His hair was brown, almost black, and it curled in a way that reminded every observer of a certain house from the Riverlands. The whispers that had been kept at bay now surged forward, though still in hushed tones. The child's features were not those of Lyonel Velaryon. They were the features of Harwin Strong. The shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes, the thick dark hair, all of it spoke to a truth that no one dared to name. In the days that followed, the court became a web of glances and half-spoken sentences. Lords and ladies exchanged knowing looks in the corridors. Servants traded rumours in the kitchens. Maesters recorded the birth in their chronicles with careful neutrality, but even they could not ignore the implications. The question that hung over the Red Keep was not whether Viserys Velaryon was truly the son of Lyonel Velaryon. The question was whether anyone would ever be brave enough to ask it aloud. No one did. Not in public, not in the throne room, not in the small council chamber. But the question did not need to be spoken, to be understood. It was written in every glance at the prince's dark hair. It was felt in every awkward silence when Harwin Strong entered a room. It was the foundation upon which the future would be built. A foundation of doubt and suspicion that would crack the realm apart. For Rhaenyra, the birth of Viserys was a triumph and a trial. She had given the realm an heir. That heir carried the stain of uncertainty. She held her son close, shielding him from the whispers as best she could, but she could not shield him from the truth. The boy would grow up knowing that his legitimacy was questioned, that his very existence was a political weapon, and the man who might have been his father, Sir Harwin Strong, could do nothing to protect him. He could only watch from a distance, a silent guardian whose presence only deepened the suspicion. The birth of Viserys Velaryon marked the beginning of a new chapter in the long, slow unravelling of the Targaryen dynasty. The marriage that was meant to unite the realm had instead given rise to a question that could not be answered, and in the years to come, that question would grow louder, more insistent, until it could no longer be ignored. But for now, the court held its breath, and the infant prince slept in his cradle, unaware of the storm gathering around him. The whispers continued, soft and persistent, like the crackling of a fire that had not yet caught flame. The birth of Viserys Velaryon had already set the court whispering. The boy had his mother's silver gold hair, but the shape of his face, the set of his jaw, and the brown of his eyes belonged unmistakably to another man. Yet for all the murmuring, the realm could still pretend. A single child might be explained away as a trick of inheritance, a throwback to some distant ancestor, or simply the mysterious ways of the gods. But when Rhaenyra gave birth to a second son, Lucerys Velaryon, the pretense became impossible to maintain. Lucerys arrived in the first month of the 114th year after Aegon's conquest, a healthy boy with a lusty cry. And like his older brother, he had the dark hair of the Strongs, not a hint of Valyrian silver, not a trace of the pale gold that marked the blood of the dragon. The child's hair was brown, thick and unmistakably Riverlander. The court observers who had held their tongues after Viserys now found it far harder to remain silent. Two sons, both dark-haired, both born to a princess married to a man of unmistakably Valyrian appearance. Sir Lyonel Velaryon was known for his pale hair, his purple eyes, his slender build. His father, Corlys the Sea Snake, was the very image of old Valyrian nobility. The contrast between Lyonel and Rhaenyra's children was not subtle. It was a glaring, undeniable contradiction. And still, the realm might have endured. A second child could be dismissed as coincidence, if one strained hard enough. But then came Joffrey, born in the 117th year, the third son of Rhaenyra and Lyonel Velaryon. Joffrey was the final nail in the coffin of plausible deniability. He too had brown hair. He too had the strong features. 3 children, 3 sons, all bearing the unmistakable stamp of Harwin Breakbones. The court could no longer pretend. The whispers became open speculation, and speculation hardened into conviction. Now it is important to understand why this mattered so deeply. It was not merely a matter of personal scandal, though scandal there certainly was. The question of paternity struck at the very foundation of the Targaryen succession. Rhaenyra had been named heir to the Iron Throne by her father, King Viserys I. She was the designated successor, the one upon whom the hopes of the realm rested, but her claim depended on the legitimacy of her children. If her sons were not trueborn, if they were bastards fathered by a man outside her marriage, then they had no right to inherit the throne after her. And if her sons were bastards, then Rhaenyra's own position as heir became precarious. For if she could not produce legitimate heirs, what was the point of naming her queen? The entire succession plan, carefully constructed by Viserys over years of political maneuvering, rested on the assumption that Rhaenyra's children would one day sit the Iron Throne. That assumption was now crumbling. The Greens, the faction supporting Queen Alicent and her children, saw their opportunity. They had always resented Rhaenyra's designation as heir, believing that a woman should not rule, and that Alicent's eldest son, Aegon, was the rightful king by tradition. But they had been forced to bide their time, waiting for a weakness they could exploit. The paternity scandal gave them exactly that. They did not need to prove anything in a court of law. They did not need a formal accusation. All they needed was to spread the rumour, to let it fester, to ensure that no one in the realm could ignore the obvious. And they did so with remarkable efficiency. Queen Alicent herself began to speak more openly of the matter, not in direct accusations but in pointed questions. She would remark, in the presence of lords and ladies, how curious it was that the Velaryon boys looked so much like the Strongs. She would wonder aloud whether the Maesters had any explanation for such a striking resemblance. She would sigh and say that it was a pity the children did not take after their father. Each comment was a small poison, carefully administered. The courtiers listened, and they repeated what they heard. The rumour spread from the Red Keep to the streets of King's Landing, from the capital to the great houses of the realm. And then there was Larys Strong, the younger son of Lord Lyonel, the man who would one day be known as the Clubfoot, watched all of this with his quiet, calculating eyes. He did not speak openly against his brother Harwin. He did not denounce the rumours, but he did nothing to stop them. In fact, he seemed to encourage the whispers subtly by his very silence. Larys understood that the scandal could be useful. It could weaken Rhaenyra, strengthen the Greens, and perhaps, in the chaos, elevate the Strong name in ways that honour could not. He was a man who saw the world as a game of shadows, and he was already playing his pieces. Meanwhile, Harwin Strong himself remained at court, a towering figure of a man, but one increasingly isolated. His reputation as a warrior, as Breakbones, could not shield him from the whispers. He knew what was being said. He knew that his presence only fueled the rumours. Yet he could not leave. He could not abandon Rhaenyra, and so he stayed, a silent accusation walking the halls of the Red Keep, a living reminder of the truth that everyone suspected but no one dared speak aloud. The births of Lucerys and Joffrey did not create the scandal. They simply made it undeniable, and in doing so, they transformed a private matter of the heart into a political weapon of immense power. The Greens wielded it with skill, and the realm began to divide. Those who supported Rhaenyra insisted that the children were legitimate, that the resemblance to the Strongs was mere coincidence, that the whispers were treasonous lies. Those who opposed her pointed to the children's hair and asked how anyone could be so blind. The truth, whatever it was, no longer mattered. What mattered was perception, and perception had turned decisively against the princess. As the years passed, the scandal did not fade. It grew. It became a central argument for those who sought to replace Rhaenyra with her half-brother Aegon. It was whispered in the halls of Harrenhal, in the gardens of the Reach, in the solar of the Eyrie. It was a story that would not die, because too many people had a stake in keeping it alive, and at the heart of it all stood Harwin Strong, the man whose love for a princess had doomed his house to infamy. The fire at Harrenhal was still years away, but the kindling had already been laid, and the sparks were flying. The whispers had begun the moment First Velaryon was born with brown hair and brown eyes. Features that belonged not to the silver-haired Velaryons, but to the Strongs of Harrenhal. By the time Lucerys arrived with the same dark locks, and Joffrey followed with a face that seemed to echo his mother's protector, rather than her lawful husband, the court no longer whispered. They watched, and they waited for someone to say aloud what everyone already believed. Harwin Strong knew what they saw. He had known from the first moment he held the infant Viserys in the training yard, when the boy's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, and the resemblance was undeniable. But in King's Landing, knowledge was not the same as proof, and proof was not the same as accusation. The realm's laws of succession rested on legitimacy, and legitimacy rested on the word of the father. Sir Lyonel Velaryon had given his name to each child. He had stood beside Rhaenyra at the cradle. He had never wavered in public. And so the boys were Velaryons, whatever the colour of their hair. But Harwin could not stay away. He was commander of the City Watch, a position that kept him near the Red Keep, near the princess, near the nursery. And he was a man whose entire reputation had been built on strength and action, not silence and restraint. When he walked through the corridors with young Viserys on his shoulders, or lifted Lucerys onto a horse for the first time, or knelt in the dirt to show Joffrey how to throw a proper punch, he was doing what any father would do, except he could never call himself that. He could never say the words. He could only be present, and hope that presence was enough. The court observed every moment. Queen Alicent watched from the windows of Maegor's Holdfast. Sir Criston Cole, whose own bitterness toward Rhaenyra had curdled into something venomous, made sure the whispers never died. They noted how Harwin lingered after official duties, how his eyes followed Rhaenyra across the throne room, how the boys ran to him before they ran to anyone else, even their mother. And they noted too that Lyonel Velaryon seemed almost relieved to have Harwin close, as if the arrangement freed him from a role he had never wanted. For Rhaenyra, the situation was a constant balancing act. She loved her children fiercely, and she loved Harwin in a way that the court could never understand. He was not just the father of her sons. He was the man who had seen her as a person, not a pawn. He had been there during the long years of her marriage to Lyonel, when the world expected her to produce heirs, and she had struggled to find any path that did not lead to ruin. With Harwin, there was no pretense. He did not want her crown or her dragons. He wanted her, and that, in a court where every affection was a potential weapon, was the most dangerous thing of all. The danger was not in what they did, but in what they could not hide. Harwin's devotion was written in every gesture. When Rhaenyra was ill after a difficult pregnancy, he was the one who ensured the maesters attended her properly, who stood guard outside her chambers, who refused to leave until she was well. When the boys were frightened during a storm, he was the one who sat with them through the night, telling stories of the great knights of old, stories in which a father always came home. He gave them something that no amount of political manoeuvring could provide, a sense of safety, and in doing so he gave the court a target. The whispers became a liability, not because they were false, but because they were true. The Greens understood that truth could be twisted into treason. If Rhaenyra's sons were bastards, then her claim to the Iron Throne was built on a lie. The entire succession, carefully arranged by King Viserys, could be undone by a single word, and so the word was never spoken aloud in the king's presence. But it was repeated in every corridor, every feast, every council meeting where the Queen's party gathered. Harwin Strong, the strongest knight in the 7 kingdoms, had become the weakest link in Rhaenyra's armor. He knew it. He must have known it. But he could not change who he was. He could not stop being the man who lifted his sons onto his shoulders, who taught to ride, who looked at Rhaenyra with an honesty that the rest of the court lacked. Loving King's Landing was a currency spent carefully, hoarded in secret, never displayed in the open. Harwin spent his freely, and in a court where every weakness was observed, that freedom became a chain. The boys grew, and with each passing year the resemblance grew harder to ignore. Viserys had Harwin's broad shoulders and determined jaw. Lucerys had his quick temper and his easy laugh. Joffrey had his stubbornness, his refusal to back down from a challenge. They were strongs in everything but name, and the court never let them forget it. The whispers followed them into the training yard, into the library, into the throne room. They heard the words bastard and strong boy long before they understood what they meant. And Harwin, who could not defend them with the truth, defended them with his presence instead. He stood behind them during their first tournaments. He trained them himself, correcting their stance, praising their courage. He was there when Viserys claimed his dragon, Vermax, and when Lucerys bonded with Arax. He was there for every milestone, every triumph, every small victory that a father would treasure, and he did it all without ever once claiming the title that belonged to him by blood. That was the tragedy of Harwin Strong. He gave everything to his children, except his name, and in the end, even that was not enough to protect them. The court's patience wore thin, the whispers grew louder, and the man who had once been called Breakbones, the strongest knight of his generation, found himself trapped in a web of his own making. He could not stay, he could not leave. He could only watch as the affection he had shown, the loyalty he had offered, the desire he had never quite hidden, became the very things that threatened to destroy the family he loved. The fire at Harrenhal would come, but before that, there was a slow, quiet unravelling. A father who could not speak, a mother who could not shield, and sons who learned far too young that the truth of their birth was a weapon that others would use against them. Harwin's devotion was forbidden, not because it was wrong, but because it was real. And in the Game of Thrones, reality is the most dangerous thing of all. For years, the court had whispered. For years, the Harwin Strong had walked the halls of the Red Keep with the patience of a man who knew what people said about him and chose not to answer. He had watched the smirks, the sideways glances, the way certain lords would fall silent when he entered a room. He had endured the rumours that clung to Princess Rhaenyra's sons, like a shadow they could not outgrow, and he had done so because to speak would be to confirm. To defend would be to admit that there was something worth defending. So he stayed quiet. He stayed close to the boys, training them in the yard, lifting them onto their first ponies, teaching them how to hold a wooden sword. He gave them the affection that their legal father, Sir Lyonel Velaryon, could not or would not provide. And he told himself that this was enough. But the court of King Viserys I was not a place where silence could protect anyone for long. The whispers had a way of growing louder, of finding new voices, of sharpening into words that could no longer be ignored. And on one particular afternoon, in the training yard of the Red Keep, those words found their target. It began with Sir Criston Cole, the man who had once been Princess Rhaenyra's sworn shield, her companion on many adventures, her defender in the tourney at the Heir's tournament. But something had soured between them. Perhaps it was the night of the hunt, when Rhaenyra had offered him a place in her bed and he had refused. Perhaps it was the marriage to Lyonel Velaryon, which Criston saw as a betrayal of everything he had stood for. Or perhaps it was simply that Criston Cole had become a man of the Greens, devoted to Queen Alicent and her children, and in that devotion he had learned to despise everything Rhaenyra represented. Whatever the cause, by the time the boys were old enough to train with real steel, Sir Criston had become one of their most persistent critics. The confrontation did not begin with a grand declaration. It began with a practice bout. Young Viserys Velaryon, Rhaenyra's eldest son, was sparring with another squire under the watchful eye of the master-at-arms. The boy was quick, agile, with a natural instinct for the blade, but he was also small for his age, and his technique was still raw. When he stumbled and fell, his opponent's wooden sword caught him on the shoulder, and Viserys let out a cry of frustration. It was nothing unusual. Boys fell in the yard all the time, but Sir Criston, standing nearby with a group of knights, chose that moment to make a comment. He did not shout it. He said it just loud enough for those around him to hear, with that particular tone of mock sympathy that cuts deeper than any insult. Something about the boy's lack of grace. Something about how he must take after his mother's side. The words were carefully chosen, ambiguous enough to deny if challenged, but clear enough to sting. And they were aimed not at Viserys, but at the man who stood at the edge of the yard, watching the practice with a stillness that had become his trademark. Sir Harwin Strong heard every syllable. For a moment, nothing happened. Harwin's jaw tightened, his hands resting on his belt, curled into fists, but he did not move. He had trained himself to let these moments pass, to swallow the anger and walk away. He had done it 100 times before, but this time was different. This time, the insult had been spoken in front of the boy. Viserys had heard it too. The young prince looked up from the dirt, his face flushed with shame and confusion, and he glanced toward the man he called Sir Harwin, the man who was more a father to him than anyone else in the world. And in that glance, Harwin saw everything. He saw the years of whispers, the careful denials, the way he had forced himself to stand by, while others questioned the legitimacy of the children he loved. He saw that his silence had not protected them, it had only made them more vulnerable. And he saw that if he did not act now, if he did not draw a line that could not be crossed, then the next insult would be worse, and the one after that worse still. Until the boys grew up believing that the world was right to doubt them. He crossed the yard in 7 long strides. The other knights saw him coming and stepped aside. Sir Criston turned, perhaps expecting a verbal retort, perhaps ready with another barb, but Harwin did not speak. He simply grabbed Criston by the collar of his tunic and slammed him against the stone wall of the keep. The impact knocked the breath from Criston's lungs. His head snapped back against the rock, and for a moment his eyes went wide with genuine surprise. He had not expected violence. He had expected words, anger, perhaps a challenge to a formal duel. But Harwin Strong was not a man of formalities. He was a man of action, of raw physical force, and in that moment, all the restraint he had shown for years came undone. "You will not speak of them again," Harwin said, his voice low and trembling with fury. "Not of the boys, not of the princess, not of anyone under her protection." Criston tried to push him off, but Harwin's grip was like iron. The other knights hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. This was Sir Harwin Strong, the commander of the City Watch, the man they called Breakbones for his feats of strength in the tourney. And this was Sir Criston Cole, a Kingsguard, a man sworn to protect the royal family. A fight between them could have consequences that rippled through the entire court. But the damage was already done. The confrontation was witnessed by 12 men, and within hours, the story had spread through every corridor of the Red Keep. Sir Harwin Strong had attacked a Kingsguard over a comment about the Velaryon princes. The implication was unmistakable. Why would a man of Harwin's station risk his position, his honour, even his life, to defend children who were not his own, unless, of course, they were his own? The rumour that had been a whisper became a shout. The suspicion that had been a shadow became a certainty in the minds of those who had already believed. And the careful denials, the polite fictions that had allowed Rhaenyra's household to function, were shattered beyond repair. For Harwin, the outburst was a release of years of pent-up emotion, but it was also a catastrophe. He had exposed himself. He had confirmed, in the most public way possible, that the rumours were true, not through words, but through the violence of his reaction. In the world of court politics, a man's actions spoke louder than any denial, and Harwin's actions had screamed the truth for all to hear. King Viserys could not ignore the incident. He summoned Harwin to the throne room and demanded an explanation. Harwin offered none. He simply stood there, his face set in a mask of defiance, and accepted whatever punishment the king deemed appropriate. Viserys, who had always been a man of mercy, chose to send Harwin away, not to the wall, not to the dungeons, but back to Harrenhal, to his father Lord Lyonel Strong, with the understanding that he was to remain there until further notice. It was a gentle sentence, all things considered, but it was also a death sentence for the family's reputation. Harwin's departure from King's Landing was seen as an admission of guilt. The rumours that had been contained within the court now spread across the realm. Every lord and lady who heard the story added their own embellishments. The children of Rhaenyra Targaryen were bastards. The heir to the Iron Throne had cuckolded her husband, and the Strong family, once respected for their legal acumen and their service to the crown, were now associated with scandal, with dishonour, with the kind of secrets that could topple dynasties. Lyonel Strong, Lord of Harrenhal and Hand of the King, watched his son's disgrace with a heavy heart. He had known the rumours. He had tried to steer Harwin away from the princess, to remind him of the dangers of proximity, but a father's warnings could not compete with a son's devotion, and now that devotion had cost them everything. Lyonel knew that his own position at court was precarious. The Greens, led by Queen Alicent and her father Sir Otto Hightower, would use this scandal to undermine the Blacks, to question the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's claim, and to push for the ascension of Prince Aegon II. The Strongs had become a weapon in a war that had not yet begun. Harwin left King's Landing in the dead of night, accompanied by a small escort. He did not say goodbye to the boys. He did not see Rhaenyra one last time. He simply rode out through the gates of the city, his shoulders broad, but his head bowed, and he made his way north toward the cursed castle that was now his home. The journey took several days, and with every mile, the weight of what he had done settled deeper into his bones. At Harrenhal he found no comfort. The great fortress, built by Harren the Black and twisted by dragonfire, was a place of cold stone and darker memories. His father Lyonel joined him there soon after, having resigned as Hand of the King. The official story was that Lyonel wished to retire to his ancestral seat, to oversee his lands and his family, but everyone knew the truth. The scandal had forced him out. The Strongs were no longer welcome at court, and so the family gathered in the shadow of Harrenhal's melted towers, trying to rebuild what had been broken. Harwin spent his days in the training yard, sparring with the garrison, trying to exhaust himself into silence. Lyonel spent his nights in the library, reading old histories, searching for precedents that might restore their honour. And Larys Strong, the one, watched them both, with eyes that saw more than they revealed. The fire came on a night when the wind was howling across the lake. No one ever proved how it started. Some said it was a candle left too close to a curtain. Some said it was the curse of Harrenhal, finally claiming its due. And some said it was something else entirely. Something that wore a human face and moved with deliberate purpose. But whatever the cause, the flames consumed the tower where Lord Lyonel and Sir Harwin were sleeping. By the time the servants raised the alarm, it was too late. The heat was so intense that the stone walls cracked. The bodies were never recovered, only ash and bone. The death of the two strong men sent shockwaves through the realm. For the Blacks, it was a devastating loss. Lyonel had been a voice of reason in a court that was losing its balance. Harwin had been a protector, a father, in all but name to the children of the heir. For the Greens, it was an opportunity. With the Strongs gone, the path to power was clearer. And for Larys Strong, the surviving son, it was a beginning. He inherited Harrenhal, he inherited the title, and he inherited the secrets that his father and brother had taken to their graves. But Larys was not a man of honour like Lyonel, nor a man of passion like Harwin. He was a man of shadows, of whispers, of the spaces between words. And in the chaos that followed the fire, he began to build a new kind of power, one that would outlast the flames and shape the war to come. The breaking point had come and gone. The Strongs had been broken, scattered, consumed. But the story of their rise and fall was not yet finished. The embers of that fire still glowed in the halls of Harrenhal, waiting for the winds of the dance to fan them into a blaze. The confrontation between Sir Harwin Strong and Sir Criston Cole had been a long time coming, but its aftermath settled over the Red Keep like a storm that had finally broken. For years, the court had whispered. For years, rumours had circulated in the spaces between formal words, in the glances exchanged across the great hall, in the silences that followed any mention of Rhaenyra's sons. But now, the whispers had been given a voice, and that voice had been answered with violence. The king had not been present for the brawl, but he heard of it soon enough, and the court felt the shift in the air. The careful architecture of denial that had allowed the royal household to function was beginning to crack. And the man who understood the better than anyone was the hand of the king himself. Lyonel Strong had built his career on the law. He had risen from a respected lord of the Riverlands to the second most powerful man in the realm. Through competence, through moderation, through an unshakable belief that order could be maintained if the right rules were followed. He had served Viserys faithfully, advising caution when others counselled war, urging patience when the court demanded action. He had believed that the truth, properly managed, could be contained. But the truth, as Lyonel was learning, had a way of escaping its cage. He watched his son from across the solar, the firelight catching the hard lines of Harwin's face. The knight stood with his arms crossed, his jaw set, his eyes still carrying the heat of the confrontation that had taken place only hours before. Lyonel had heard the accounts. He knew what Criston Cole had said, and he knew what Harwin had done in response. And he knew, with the cold clarity that had always been his greatest strength and his greatest burden, that the game was over. Harwin had never been a man for subtlety. That was Larys's domain, the younger son who moved through the shadows of the court like a whisper. Harwin was built for action, for the training yard, for the battlefield. He was the strongest knight in the Seven Kingdoms, a man whose reputation had been earned through feats of strength that bordered on legend. But the same qualities that made him a hero on the field made him a liability in the court. He could not dissemble. He could not pretend. And when he looked at Rhaenyra's sons, the truth was written across his face for anyone who cared to read it. Lyonel had known for years. He had seen the way Harwin looked at the princess, the way he positioned himself near her children, the way his voice softened when he spoke their names. He had told himself that it was loyalty, that it was the natural affection of a sworn protector, but he had known, and he had done nothing because doing something would have meant acknowledging a reality. The princess was married to First Velaryon. The succession depended on the legitimacy of her sons. To admit what everyone suspected would be to unravel the entire tapestry of the royal line. But now the tapestry was unraveling anyway. Lyonel rose from his chair and crossed to the window, looking out over the courtyard below. The night was quiet, the torches casting long shadows across the stone. He could see the towers of the Red Keep rising against the dark sky, and beyond them, the distant lights of the city. He had spent so many years in this place, believing that he could serve the realm by holding the line, by keeping the peace, by ensuring that the machinery of government continued to function. But the machinery was breaking, and his son was at the centre of the fracture. He turned to face Harwin, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, measured, the voice of a man who had spent a lifetime choosing his words with care. "You cannot stay here." Harwin looked up, his expression shifting from defiance to confusion. "Father, I did what any man would do." He insulted the princess. He insulted her sons. He insulted the truth, Lyonel replied. "And you answered with your fists, which is the answer of a man who has no other defense. You have spent years proving what the court already suspected, and tonight, you made it impossible for anyone to pretend otherwise." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Harwin opened his mouth to respond, But Lyonel raised a hand, silencing him. "I am not your father now," he said. "I am the hand of the king, and I am telling you that if you remain in this city, you will destroy everything. You will destroy the princess. You will destroy her sons. You will destroy this house. The court will tear itself apart over what you have done, and the blame will fall on those who cannot defend themselves." Harwin's hands clenched at his sides. "I have done nothing wrong. You have done everything wrong," Lyonel said, his voice rising for the first time. "Not because you loved her, but because you let that love be seen. You have given the enemies of this house a weapon, and they will use it. Criston Cole will not forget tonight. The Hightowers will not forget. And when the king is gone, there will be no one to protect you, or her children." The fire crackled in the hearth, and for a long moment neither man spoke. Lyonel felt the weight of his years pressing down on him. The exhaustion of a lifetime spent trying to hold together a kingdom that seemed determined to tear itself apart. He had advised kings. He had shaped laws. He had built a reputation as one of the most capable administrators the realm had ever seen. But none of that mattered now. None of it could save his son. "You will return to Harrenhal," Lyonel said, his voice steady. "You will take your leave of the court, and you will go home. It is the only way." Harwin shook his head. "I will not abandon her." "You will not abandon her," Lyonel repeated. "You will save her. Every day you remain, you place her in greater danger. Every glance, every word, every moment of attention you give to her sons is a stone laid on the path to her destruction. If you love her, you will leave." The words struck Harwin like a blow. He stood there, his broad shoulders sagging, the strength that had made him a legend seeming to drain away. He looked, in that moment, not like the strongest man in the Seven Kingdoms, but like a son who had failed his father, and Lyonel, watching him, felt the full weight of his own tragedy. He was a master of the law, a man who had spent his life studying the rules that govern the realm. He knew the precedents, the procedures, the careful language that could turn a crisis into a negotiation. But the law could not protect his son from the truth. The law could not undo the rumours that had already spread. The law could not make the court forget what it had seen. He had spent his career believing that order could be imposed from above, that the right structures could contain the chaos of human nature. But human nature had found a way through. It always did. "Go to Harrenhal," Lyonel said, his voice softer now. "Take your brothers, take your household, leave the court behind, and let the storm pass over us." "And what of you?" Harwin asked. "I will remain," Lyonel said. "I will serve the king as I have always served him, and I will pray that the damage can be contained." He did not say what he truly believed, that the damage was already beyond repair, that the cracks in the foundation of the realm were too wide to be filled. He did not say that he was sending his son away not to save the princess, but to save him from the fire that was coming. He did not say that he feared the fire would consume them all. But Harwin must have seen something in his father's eyes, because he nodded slowly, and he did not argue further. In the days that followed, the preparations were made. The strong household began to pack, the carts loaded with the possessions of a family that had spent years in the capital. Lyonel watched from the window of his tower as the procession formed in the courtyard below, the horses stamping in the cold morning air. Harwin stood at the head of the column, his armour gleaming, his face unreadable. Beside him, Larys sat on a smaller horse, his crutch strapped to the saddle, his eyes scanning the crowd with the quiet attention that had always marked him as different from his brother. Lyonel did not go down to say goodbye. He could not bear to see Harwin's face one more time, to hear the words that would pass between them, to pretend that this was a temporary separation rather than the end of something. He watched as the column began to move, the horses stepping through the gate, the banners of House Strong fluttering in the wind. He watched until they were gone, swallowed by the streets of the city. And then he turned back to his desk, to the papers that awaited him, to the duties that would not wait. He was the hand of the king. He had a realm to govern, and he had a family to mourn. even though they were not yet dead. The road to Harrenhal was long, and the castle that awaited them was vast and cursed, a monument to the ambitions of a dynasty that had crumbled to dust. Lyonel had spent little time there since becoming lord, preferring the order of the Red Keep to the damp halls of that ancient fortress. But now his son would make it his home, and Lyonel would remain in the capital, alone, carrying the burden of a secret that could no longer be hidden. He thought of Rhaenyra, of the children who bore his son's blood in their veins, of the war that was brewing on the horizon. He thought of the king, whose health was failing, whose will was fading, whose refusal to confront the truth had allowed the poison to spread. And he thought of the fire that was coming, the fire that would consume them all, the fire that he could not stop no matter how many laws he wrote, or how many councils he convened. But he did not know, as he sat in his tower that night, that the fire was closer than he imagined. He did not know that the flames would find him in the halls of Harrenhal, that the smoke would fill his lungs, that the heat would strip the flesh from his bones. He did not know that his final counsel to his son would be his last act as a father, and that the tragedy of House Strong was only beginning. For now he simply sat, and he waited, and he hoped that the storm would pass. But the storm was not passing. The storm was gathering, and it would break over the realm with a fury that even the wisest hand could not have foreseen. Lyonel Strong had spent years in the service of the Iron Throne, advising kings, shaping policy, and building a reputation as one of the most capable hands the realm had seen. But now, in the quiet aftermath of his final counsel to his son, he understood that the time for service had passed. The court of King Viserys I was no longer a place where House Strong could thrive. It had become a nest of whispers, and the whispers had teeth. And so, on a grey morning that seemed to hold its breath, father and son departed the Red Keep. They did not leave in disgrace, not officially. Lyonel had requested leave to return to Harrenhal, citing the need to attend to his duties as lord of the castle and to oversee the administration of his lands. The king granted the request with a heavy heart, for Viserys valued Lyonel's counsel and had grown fond of the steady presence of the Strongs at court. But even a king could not stop the tide of rumour, and Viserys understood that distance might cool the fires of scandal. Harwin Strong rode beside his father, his face set in a mask of resignation, the great warrior known as Breakbones. The man who had once lifted a man above his head in the training yard now seemed diminished. He had left behind more than the capital. He had left behind the woman he loved, and the 3 boys he could never call his own. The road to Harrenhal stretched before them, long and winding through the Riverlands, and with every mile the towers of King's Landing shrank further into the haze. The journey itself was uneventful, but that was part of its weight. There were no ambushes, no dramatic farewells, no last-minute pleas from the princess. Rhaenyra had not come to see them off. Perhaps she thought it wiser to avoid any further fuel for the gossip fires. Perhaps she simply could not bear the sight of Harwin leaving. Either way, the absence of a final word hung over the column of riders like a banner no one would raise. They passed through the gates of the city and into the countryside, where the fields of the Crownlands gave way to the rolling hills and thick forests of the Riverlands. The air grew cooler, the roads less travelled. Lyonel and Harwin spoke little. There was nothing left to say that had not already been said in the privacy of their chambers. The decision had been made. The die was cast. All that remained was to accept the consequences. As they travelled, the landscape began to change. The Riverlands were a land of rivers and lakes, of fertile valleys and ancient woods. But the closer they drew to Harrenhal, the more the land seemed to take on a brooding quality. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. The sky, which had been overcast for much of the journey, turned a deeper shade of grey, as if the heavens themselves were watching their approach. Harrenhal had always been a place of ill omen, built by Harren the Black, the Ironborn king who defied the Targaryens. It was meant to be the greatest castle in all of Westeros. Its towers were massive, its walls impossibly thick, its halls vast enough to swallow entire armies. But Harren the Black had built it with the labour of thousands of slaves, and the blood and suffering of those workers had soaked into the very stones. When Aegon the Conqueror came with his dragons, Harrenhal became a tomb. Harren and his sons burned alive within its walls, and the castle has never shaken off that curse. Every lord who has held Harrenhal since has met a tragic end. Some died in battle, some by poison, some by madness. The castle seemed to consume its masters, leaving only ruin and sorrow in its wake. And now Lyonel Strong, the hand of the king, and his son Harwin were riding toward that very fate. They arrived at dusk. The castle loomed before them, its 5 great towers: the Tower of Ghosts, the Tower of Dread, the Tower of the Widow, the Tower of the Weirwood, and the Kingspire Tower, stretching into the darkening sky like the fingers of a skeletal hand. The gates stood open, as if expecting them. The servants had been alerted, and a small retinue of household guards stood at attention, their faces unreadable in the fading light. Lyonel dismounted slowly, his joints aching from the long ride. He looked up at the castle that was now his seat, and for a moment he seemed to hesitate. Perhaps he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Perhaps he sensed that this was not a homecoming, but a surrender. Harwin followed suit, his eyes scanning the walls with a warrior's instinct. There was no warmth in his gaze, only the grim acceptance of a man who knows he is walking into a cage. They entered the great hall, where a fire had been lit in the massive hearth. The flames cast long shadows that danced across the walls, making the stone seem alive. Lyonel took his seat at the high table, and Harwin stood beside him. The servants brought food and wine, but neither man had much appetite. The silence of the hall was oppressive, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of wind whistling through the towers. That night, as Lyonel and Harwin lay in their chambers, the castle seemed to breathe around them. The walls groaned, the floors creaked, and somewhere in the depths of the structure, a door slammed shut. It was as if Harrenhal was settling into its new inhabitants, testing them, waiting. The days that followed were quiet. Lyonel threw himself into the work of lordship, reviewing accounts, hearing petitions, and inspecting the castle's defences. Harwin trained in the yard, sparring with the garrison, but his heart was not in it. He would often stop and stare at the horizon, as if expecting a rider from the south, a messenger bearing news from King's Landing. But no rider came. The finality of their departure settled over them like a shroud. They had left the centre of royal life, the court where decisions were made and history was written. Now they were lords of a cursed castle in the Riverlands, far from the intrigues and passions that had defined them. The world of King's Landing continued without them. Rhaenyra would raise her sons, the Greens would plot, and the dance of the dragons would eventually begin. But for Lyonel and Harwin Strong, their part in that story was already over. Harrenhal, long associated with catastrophe, was waiting to claim its newest lords, and it would not have to wait long. The fire that would consume them was already smouldering in the shadows, set by a hand they trusted. But that is a story for another telling. For now, father and son slept beneath the same roof, unaware that the castle's curse was about to fulfill itself once more. The road from King's Landing to Harrenhal is a long one, winding through the Riverlands past fields and forests that grow darker the closer you draw to the Black Castle. For Lyonel and Harwin Strong, that journey was a retreat from everything they had built. Lyonel had served as Hand of the King with competence and restraint, but the court had become a nest of vipers, and his son's heart had betrayed them both. Harwin had loved Rhaenyra, and though he never spoke it aloud, everyone knew. The whispers had grown too loud, the accusations too dangerous. So father and son left the capital behind, riding north toward the ancestral seat that had never truly felt like home. Harrenhal is a castle of monstrous proportions, built by the Ironborn King Harren the Black and cursed by dragonfire before it was even finished. Its towers are twisted, its halls vast and cold, and its stones seemed to hold the memory of every tragedy that has ever occurred within them. Lyonel and Harwin arrived there in the late autumn of 120 years after Aegon's conquest. Seeking the quiet that had eluded them in King's Landing, they had plans perhaps to rebuild the house's reputation away from the intrigues of the Red Keep, but the castle had other plans. On the night of the fire, the Lord's Tower of Harrenhal became a pyre. The flames rose suddenly, fed by dry timber and old tapestries, and within hours the entire tower was consumed. The heat was so intense that the stone itself cracked. When the fire finally burned itself out, the bodies of Lyonel Strong and his eldest son, Harwin, were found among the ashes. The official story, announced by maesters and servants who survived, was a tragic accident. A candle left too close to a curtain, perhaps, or a spark from a hearth that caught the rushes. Such things happen in old castles. The king accepted the explanation, and the realm mourned, but few believed it. Not in the court, not in the Riverlands, not among those who knew the politics of the day. The fire came too soon after Lyonel's resignation as Hand, too soon after Harwin's banishment from the capital. It came at a moment when the Greens and the Blacks were sharpening their knives, when the succession crisis was reaching a boiling point, and it came when Larys Strong, the younger son, was conveniently absent from Harrenhal that night. Larys had remained in King's Landing, and he would later be seen as the most obvious beneficiary of the tragedy. The whispers grew into a conviction. The fire was no accident. It was murder, ordered by someone who wanted the Strongs silenced. Who gave the order was never proven. Some pointed to Queen Alicent and her faction, who saw Lyonel as too close to Rhaenyra. Others pointed to Larys himself, a man who had always been overlooked, who had always walked with a clubfoot and a quiet smile, and who now stood to inherit everything. The truth is lost to history, buried under the ash of Harrenhal, but the effect was immediate. In a single night, the honourable public line of House Strong was destroyed. Lyonel, the wise hand, and Harwin, the strong warrior, were gone. What remained was Larys, a man of shadows and secrets, a man who would go on to serve as Master of Whisperers, weaving webs of deceit that would shape the dance of the dragons. The fire at Harrenhal did not just kill two men. It ended the chapter of House Strong that had been built on law, loyalty, and love, and it opened the door for something far darker. The silence that followed the fire was as heavy as the smoke that lingered over Harrenhal. In the Red Keep, Rhaenyra received the news with a stillness that betrayed nothing. But those who knew her saw the grief in her eyes. Harwin was gone, and with him the last thread of her youth. Daemon, ever the opportunist, saw the vacancy left by the Strongs as a chance to strengthen his own position. But even he could not ignore the shadow that now fell over the succession. The Greens moved quickly, whispering that the tragedy was divine judgment, a sign that the gods favoured a true-born king over a woman stained by rumour. And Larys Strong, now Lord of Harrenhal, returned to court with a limp and a smile that never reached his eyes. He took his seat among the council, and from that day forward, every secret, every whispered plot, every knife in the dark seemed to trace back to him. The fire had not only killed two men, it had forged a weapon. The dance of the dragons was still years away, but the first embers had already been lit in the ashes of Harrenhal, and as the seasons turned, the castle itself stood as a monument to ambition and ruin, waiting for the next tragedy to fill its halls. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The fire at Harrenhal left two bodies in the ash and rubble, but it left one survivor who had not been inside the castle that night. Larys Strong, the younger son of Lord Lyonel, had remained in King's Landing when his father and brother set out for the Riverlands. He was not present to witness the flames, but he was very much present to inherit everything that remained. In the days after the tragedy, the official account was straightforward. A terrible accident a candle left unattended, a tower of old dry stone and timber that burned faster than anyone could react. The maesters recorded it as a misfortune, and the crown offered its condolences. But in the corridors of the Red Keep, and in the whispered conversations of lords and servants alike, another story took shape. It was a story that pointed not to chance, but to design. And at the centre of that story stood Larys Strong. He was known even then as a quiet man. A man who watched more than he spoke, who seemed to see through the words. People said to the intentions they hid, his clubfoot had kept him from the martial pursuits that defined his brother Harwin. And so he had turned to other forms of strength. Information, influence, the careful cultivation of secrets. In a court where power flowed through whispers, Larys had become a master of the quiet current. The suspicion that he had arranged the fire did not arise from any single piece of evidence. It arose from the pattern of events. Lyonel Strong had been Hand of the King, a position of immense authority, but also one that made enemies. He had recently counselled King Viserys to send his daughter Rhaenyra away from court, a move that would have weakened her position, and Harwin, the heir to Harrenhal, had become a political liability because of his rumoured relationship with the princess. Both men stood in the way of certain ambitions. Both men died together, leaving Larys as the sole lord of Harrenhal, free from the shadow of his father and the reputation of his brother. But to say that Larys Strong arranged the fire is to enter the realm of speculation, and the histories are careful to preserve the ambiguity. No confession was ever made. No witness ever came forward. The fire itself left little behind but ash and the twisted remains of a great hall. What remains is the question, and the question is perhaps more telling than any answer could be, because Larys never denied the accusation. He never defended himself. He simply allowed the suspicion to hang in the air, like smoke from a fire that had already burned. In the weeks that followed, he accepted the title of Lord of Harrenhal without ceremony. He did not mourn publicly, nor did he celebrate. He simply moved forward, taking his place in the court as a man who had lost his family but gained a seat of power. And in that quiet acceptance, many saw the cold hand of a planner who had always known exactly what he was doing. The question of Larys Strong is not just about whether he killed his father and brother. It is about what kind of man would do such a thing, and what kind of world would allow him to rise because of it. In the story of House Strong, he is the final chapter, the one who outlived the honourable line and turned the family name into a symbol of something darker. He did not need dragons or armies. He needed only patience, and the willingness to let others underestimate him until it was too late. And as the realm moved closer to war, that patience would serve him well. The fire at Harrenhal had cleared the path, and Larys Strong was now free to walk it, step by careful step, into the chaos that was about to consume the Seven Kingdoms. And so Larys Strong became a figure of quiet power in the shadows of the Red Keep. A man whose influence grew not through loud declarations or visible alliances, but through the careful cultivation of those who held the levers of authority. He found a particular patron in Queen Alicent, who valued his discretion and his ability to uncover truths that others wished to keep hidden. In her chambers, away from the ears of the court, Larys would whisper secrets that shifted the balance of favour, always careful to give just enough to be trusted, never enough to be caught. He became her spider, spinning webs that ensnared her rivals, and in return, she ensured his position remained secure. The war that was coming would not be won by swords alone, but by the information that flowed through these whispered exchanges. Larys understood that the true battlefield was the mind of the king, and later the minds of those who would claim the throne. He did not seek glory or renown. He sought control, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he held the strings that moved the players. And as the realm fractured into greens and blacks, Larys Strong remained a constant, a shadow that watched from the corner, always present, always listening, always ready to turn a whispered word into a weapon. The fire at Harrenhal had been his first great act of destruction, but it would not be his last. In the years that followed, he would prove that the most dangerous men are not those who wield swords, but those who know when to let others burn. The fire at Harrenhal left House Strong with a single surviving son, and that son walked with a limp that the entire court had long since learned to notice and then to dismiss. Larys Strong had been born with a clubfoot, a deformity that twisted his right foot inward and forced him to rely on a cane or a crutch for every step he took. In a world that celebrated the warrior's body, that celebrated Harwin's raw strength and Lyonel's commanding presence, Larys was the one who could not run, could not fight, could not stand without visible effort, and because of that, nearly everyone underestimated him. The cruel assumptions came early and never really stopped. At court, whispers followed Larys like a shadow. They called him the Clubfoot, not as a neutral description, but as a label that carried pity and contempt. They assumed his physical weakness meant a weak mind, a weak will, a man who could be overlooked, manipulated, or simply ignored. When he spoke, his voice was soft, measured, almost apologetic, and that only reinforced the impression of a man who was harmless. The lords and ladies of King's Landing saw a cripple who had inherited Harrenhal only because his father and brother had died in a fire. They saw a man who had stumbled into power, not earned it. But Larys Strong saw the court differently. He understood that the assumptions others made about his body were not obstacles to be overcome, but tools to be used. Every time a lord dismissed him as a cripple, that lord was lowering his guard. Every time a lady pitied him, she was revealing her own secrets without realizing it. Larys learned to listen more than he spoke, to watch more than he acted, to let the court's noise flow around him while he sat still and observed. His stillness was not weakness, it was patience. It was the stillness of a spider waiting for the web to tremble. Contrast that stillness with Harwin's celebrated strength. Harwin Breakbones had been a man of action, of physical presence, of honor worn openly like a badge. When Harwin walked into a room, everyone knew it. His shoulders filled doorways, his voice carried across training yards, his anger was visible and immediate. He had been the kind of man who solved problems with his fists, who defended Rhaenyra's honor with a public confrontation, who believed that truth and strength would prevail, if only he stood tall enough. And that very strength had made him vulnerable. It had made him predictable. It had made him a target. Larys, by contrast, was invisible. He moved through the Red Keep like a shadow, his cane tapping softly on stone floors, his eyes taking in everything, while his face revealed nothing. He did not need to fight, because fighting would only draw attention. He did not need to defend his honor, because honor was a currency that could be spent and lost. What Larys needed was information, and he gathered it the way a miser gathers coins, piece at a time, never revealing what he knew until the moment it could do the most damage. The Clubfoot itself became part of his strategy. When he limped into a council chamber, lords would glance at him and then look away, dismissing him as a non-threat. When he struggled to climb a staircase, servants would rush to help him, and in that moment of assistance, they would speak freely, assuming he was too frail to matter. Larys cultivated that perception deliberately. He played the part of the weak, harmless cripple because it gave him access to places that a strong man could never enter. He let them see what they expected to see, and while they were looking at his foot, they were not looking at his hands, and his hands were busy. Larys built a network of informants, of whispers, of small favours and larger debts. He knew which lords were sleeping with which servants. He knew which knights were gambling beyond their means. He knew which maesters were passing letters that should never have been written. And he knew, perhaps better than anyone, exactly what had happened the night of the fire at Harrenhal. Whether he had ordered the blaze or simply allowed it to happen, the result was the same. He was now Lord of Harrenhal, and he was the only one who truly understood how the Game of Thrones was played. The court continued to underestimate him. They saw the limp and assumed the man was broken. They saw the quiet voice and assumed the man had nothing to say. They saw the cane and assumed the man could not stand on his own. But Larys Strong had been standing on his own his entire life, balancing on a twisted foot in a world that wanted him to fall. He had learned to turn every disadvantage into leverage, every assumption into a blind spot, every whispered insult into a piece of information he could use later. And as the Dance of the Dragons began to cast its long shadow over the realm, Larys Strong was already in position. He had no dragons, no armies, no legendary strength. He had only his clubfoot, his cane, and the quiet certainty that the people who laughed at him would not laugh for long. The fire at Harrenhal had cleared the path. Now he would walk it, one limping step at a time, toward a power that no one had seen coming. That power would soon find its expression in the shifting loyalties of the Greens and the Blacks, in the secret letters carried by ravens in the night, in the quiet words spoken to a queen who needed to hear them. But for now, Larys Strong remained in the shadows of the Red Keep, still, patient, and utterly underestimated. And that was exactly where he wanted to be. Larys Strong returned to King's Landing a changed man, though few would have noticed the difference. He had always moved quietly, spoken softly, and kept his eyes on details that others overlooked. But now, in the wake of the fire at Harrenhal, there was a new precision to his movements, a deliberate quality to every word he chose to speak. The Clubfoot, as he was cruelly called, had inherited the largest castle in the Riverlands, but he did not rush to claim it. Instead, he lingered at court, where the real power resided. Queen Alicent Hightower was a woman under immense pressure. Her husband, King Viserys I, was failing, his body ravaged by years of illness and the slow corruption of his flesh. She watched as the succession crisis deepened, knowing that her son Aegon was being pushed aside in favour of Rhaenyra, the king's chosen heir. The court was a nest of vipers, and Alicent needed allies she could trust. But trust was a rare commodity in the Red Keep. Larys understood this better than most. He had spent his life observing, listening, and learning the subtle language of power. He knew that the Queen was isolated, surrounded by men who wanted her favour but offered little in return. She needed someone who could see what others could not, who could hear the whispers that never reached her ears. And Larys, with his clubfoot and his quiet demeanour, was the perfect instrument for such work. He began by offering small pieces of information. A servant here, a guard there. He cultivated a network of informants, people who owed him favours or feared his knowledge. He learned the art of the whispered word, the dropped hint, the carefully timed revelation. Information became his currency, and he spent it wisely. He did not approach the Queen directly at first. Instead, he let her come to him, let her see that he was useful, that he could be trusted with secrets that others could not bear. The first true test came when a rumour reached his ears. A knight of the Kingsguard, one of Rhaenyra's supporters, had been overheard speaking too freely in a tavern near the docks. The words were treasonous, or at least close enough to treason to be dangerous. Larys did not report this to the Master of Whisperers, who was a creature of the king's own making. Instead, he found a way to let the information reach Alicent through a handmaiden, a woman who had been in the Queen's service for years, and who owed Larys a debt of gratitude for a small kindness shown to her brother. The Queen acted on the information, and the knight was quietly removed from his post. No one knew where the tip had come from, but Alicent began to notice Larys Strong more carefully. She saw the way he lingered at the edges of gatherings, the way his eyes moved constantly, the way he seemed to know things before they happened. She began to seek him out, to ask his opinion on matters of court gossip and political manoeuvring. And Larys, with the patience of a spider, wove his web. He did not merely serve the powerful, he made himself necessary to them. He understood that power was not just about swords and armies, but about information, about knowing what others did not know, about being the one person who could be trusted with the truth. He became the Queen's secret ally, the shadow at her side, the man who could find answers to questions she dared not ask aloud. The servants in the Red Keep learned to fear him. Not because he was cruel, but because he knew their secrets. He knew which maids had stolen silver from the kitchens, which guards had gambled away their wages, which cooks had whispered complaints about the royal family. He collected these pieces of knowledge like a miser collects coins, and he used them to ensure loyalty. A word in the right ear, a threat delivered with a smile, and the servants became his eyes and ears throughout the castle. Spies were everywhere. Larys cultivated them with care, choosing people who were overlooked, who were invisible to the powerful. The boy who swept the floors of the Tower of the Hand, the woman who mended the Queen's gowns, the old man who tended the gardens near the throne room. These were the people who saw and heard everything, and they reported to Larys without question. He paid them in coin, in favours, in protection from the consequences of their own small crimes. The information flowed to him like water, and he channeled it to the Queen. He told her which lords were wavering in their support, which knights could be bought, which whispers from the street might become threats to her son's claim. He became indispensable, not through force or fear, but through the quiet accumulation of trust and knowledge. Alicent began to rely on him in ways she had never relied on anyone. She confided in him her fears about the king's health, her doubts about the loyalty of the small council, her growing certainty that war was coming. Larys listened, and he offered advice that was always practical, always grounded in the information he had gathered. He never promised more than he could deliver, and he always delivered what he promised. There was a moment, late one evening, when the Queen sat alone in her chambers, staring at the candlelight. Larys stood in the shadows, as he often did, waiting to be addressed. She asked him if he thought the realm would tear itself apart. He answered honestly, telling her that it already was, that the cracks were visible to anyone who cared to look. She asked him if he would stand with her when the time came, and he told her that he already had, that he had been standing with her since the day his father and brother died in the fire at Harrenhal. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Alicent did not ask him about the fire. She did not want to know the truth, or perhaps she already knew it and chose not to speak of it. What mattered was that Larys was hers, and she was his, bound by a web of secrets and shared ambition. The Green faction grew stronger, not through open warfare, but through the quiet accumulation of power. Larys Strong was at the heart of it, a spider in the centre of a vast web, feeling every tremor, every movement, every whispered word. He did not seek glory or recognition. He sought influence, the kind of influence that came from being the one person who knew everything, who could be trusted with anything who was necessary to the survival of the Queen and her cause. And so the Clubfoot became more than a crippled lord with a cursed castle. He became the shadow behind the throne, the secret ally who made the Greens possible. He gathered information through servants, spies, and fear, and he used it to bind the Queen to him in a partnership that would shape the course of the Dance of the Dragons. The previous chapter ended with Larys Strong, firmly entrenched as Queen Alicent Hightower's most trusted and most dangerous ally. He had built his power not through swords or speeches, but through whispers, through secrets gathered by servants and spies, through the quiet fear he instilled in everyone who crossed his path. While the court of King's Landing prepared for the inevitable succession crisis, Larys watched and waited, his Clubfoot a constant reminder that he had been underestimated his entire life. And now, with the death of King Viserys I, the moment for which he had been preparing finally arrived. The king's death did not come as a surprise. Viserys had been failing for years, his body ravaged by age and illness, his mind wandering in and out of clarity. Yet his passing, when it happened, was kept secret for a time. Queen Alicent and her council moved quickly to secure the throne for her eldest son, Aegon II. They knew that Rhaenyra, the named heir, would not yield without a fight. The Greens, as Alicent's faction came to be known, had been planning this moment for years. They controlled the capital, the treasury, and most importantly, the Iron Throne itself. Within hours of Viserys' death, Aegon II was crowned in the Dragon Pit, his coronation a swift and decisive act of defiance against the late king's wishes. Across the narrow sea, on Dragonstone, Rhaenyra received the news with shock and fury. She had been her father's chosen successor, named Heir when she was just a child, and she had spent years preparing to rule. But the Greens had moved first, and now there were two kings in Westeros. The realm was split. The great houses chose sides based on old loyalties, marriage alliances, and personal ambitions. The Riverlands, where House Strong held its seat at Harrenhal, became a crucial battleground, and it was here that the division within House Strong itself became starkly visible. Harwin Strong, the eldest son of Lyonel, was long dead, killed in the fire at Harrenhal alongside his father, but Harwin had left behind 3 sons, though they did not bear the Strong name. Viserys, Larys, and First Velaryon were the children of Rhaenyra Targaryen, and it was an open secret in the court that their true father was Harwin Strong. The boys had their mother's colouring, but their features, their build, their very bearing, all spoke of Harwin's blood. They were Strongs in all but name, and when the dance of the dragons began, they stood firmly with their mother, the Blacks. Viserys, the eldest, was already a young man of promise, sharp of mind and bold of spirit. He had been raised as a prince of the realm, but he carried the weight of his disputed parentage with a quiet dignity. Larys, the second son, was more impulsive, more eager to prove himself, and Joffrey, the youngest, was still a boy, but he too would be drawn into the war. These 3 sons of Harwin Strong, though they never claimed the name, were the living legacy of their father's love for Rhaenyra. They were the proof that House Strong's blood ran through the veins of the Targaryen succession, and they would fight and die for that blood. On the other side of the conflict stood Larys Strong, the surviving son of Lyonel, the man who had risen from the ashes of his family's destruction. Larys had chosen the Greens. He served Queen Alicent as Master of Whisperers, and his network of informants was the backbone of the Green War effort. He had no love for Rhaenyra, no loyalty to the memory of his brother Harwin. In fact, many whispered that Larys had orchestrated the fire that killed his father and brother, though no proof was ever found. Whether that was true or not, Larys had certainly benefited. He was Lord of Harrenhal now, and he wielded his power with cold precision, so House Strong was divided. The sons of Harwin, the true-born heirs of the Strong line through their father, fought for Rhaenyra, and Larys, the uncle who had perhaps murdered their grandfather and father, fought for Aegon. It was a family split not just by allegiance, but by blood and by betrayal. The dance of the dragons would tear them apart, just as it tore apart so many other houses. The war itself began in earnest with skirmishes and alliances. Rhaenyra's cause was bolstered by the support of House Velaryon, the wealthiest house in the realm, and by the loyalty of the North and the Riverlands. But the Greens held the capital and the treasury, and they had the backing of the Reach and the Stormlands. The dragons themselves were divided. Rhaenyra had Syrax, her own dragon, and her sons had their own mounts. Viserys rode Vermax, Larys rode Arax, and Joffrey, though young, would later claim Tyraxes. On the green side, Aegon II rode Sunfire, his brother Aemon rode Vargar, the largest dragon in the world, and their sister Helena rode Dreamfire. The first major blows were struck not on the battlefield, but in the halls of power. Rhaenyra sent her sons as envoys to secure alliances. Viserys flew north to treat with the Starks, while Larys flew to Storm's End to speak with Lord Boros Baratheon. It was at Storm's End that the war took its first tragic turn. Aemon Targaryen, the one-eyed prince of the Greens, was also there, seeking the same alliance. The 2 young men, both hot-headed and proud, clashed. Larys, still a boy, fled on his dragon Arax, but Aemon pursued on Vargar. In the stormy skies above Shipbreaker Bay, Vargar caught Arax and tore him apart, killing Larys and his dragon both. This was the first death of a dragon rider in the war, and it shattered any hope of a peaceful resolution. Rhaenyra was consumed by grief and rage. The Greens had killed her son, The war would now be fought without mercy, and for House Strong, the death of Viserys was a personal blow. He was Harwin's son, a grandson of Lyonel Strong, and his blood had been spilled by the very faction that Larys served. The division within the house had become a chasm of blood. Larys Strong, meanwhile, continued his work in the shadows. He fed information to Queen Alicent. He orchestrated betrayals. He ensured that the Green Cause had the intelligence it needed to survive, but his own position was precarious. The lords of the Riverlands, many of whom had been loyal to Lyonel Strong, now looked upon Larys with suspicion. They remembered the fire at Harrenhal. They remembered how Larys had risen so quickly after father and brother's deaths, and they saw him now serving the queen who had stolen the throne from Rhaenyra, the woman who had loved Harwin. The Dance of the Dragons was not just a war between two factions of Targaryens. It was the final destruction of every hope that Lyonel Strong had represented. Lyonel had been a man of order, of law, of competence. He had served as Hand of the King with integrity. Believing that the realm could be governed wisely and justly, he had raised his sons to be honourable, to serve the crown, to build a legacy that would outlast him. But the fire at Harrenhal had taken him and Harwin, and the war that followed had taken everything else. His grandsons, the sons of Harwin, were now soldiers in a brutal conflict. His surviving son, Larys, had become a creature of intrigue and deceit. The house that Lyonel had built was crumbling, its foundations washed away by blood and fire, and yet the story of House Strong was not over. The war would continue, and the Strongs, both the living and the dead, would play their parts. Viserys would become a commander, leading the Black forces in the Riverlands. Joffrey would be sent to the Vale for safety, but he too would eventually take to the skies, and Larys would remain in King's Landing, his web of secrets growing ever more intricate. The dance was only beginning, and for House Strong, the dance would be a dance of ashes. Harrenhal had never been a castle that anyone truly owned. It was more like a burden that passed from hand to hand, each lord believing they could tame it, each one proven wrong. The time the Dance of the Dragons tore the realm apart, Harrenhal had already changed hands more times than most castles in Westeros, and the war would only accelerate that pattern. The great fortress built by Harren the Black stood as a monument to ambition and ruin, and in the opening months of the Civil War, it became a prize that every faction wanted and no one could keep. When the fighting began, Harrenhal was held by House Strong, but that house was already fractured. Larys Strong, the Clubfoot, had taken control after the fire that killed his father and brother. He was a creature of the court, not a warrior, and he had thrown his lot in with Queen Alicent and the Greens. But the castle itself was a liability. Its walls were immense, its towers taller than any in Westeros, but it required a garrison of thousands to defend properly. In peacetime, that was a drain on resources. In wartime, it was a trap. The first to test Harrenhal's strength were the Blacks, Rhaenyra's supporters in the Riverlands, led by houses like Tully and Blackwood, began to move against green-aligned lords. Harrenhal sat at the heart of the Riverlands, a natural stronghold for anyone who wanted to control the region. But the castle's size worked against it. A small force could hold the gatehouses, but they could not patrol the miles of curtain wall. They could not guard every post and door, every crumbling stair. The castle was a labyrinth, and in a siege a labyrinth is a liability. Larys Strong understood this. He was not a military commander, but he was a survivor. He knew that Harrenhal could not be held by a handful of men, and he had no intention of dying in a doomed defence. So he did what he did best. He manoeuvred. He abandoned the castle to the Blacks without a fight, slipping away to King's Landing with his secrets and his spies. The Blacks took Harrenhal unopposed, but they soon discovered that taking it was the easy part. The castle swallowed men. It needed food, firewood, and constant repairs. The Great Hall could seat 1,000, but heating it was impossible. The towers were so tall that the wind howled through them like a living thing, and the stone seemed to sweat with a cold dampness that seeped into bones. The Blacks garrisoned the castle with Riverland men. But the garrison was never large enough. Every lord who held Harrenhal during the war faced the same problem. The castle was too big to defend with the forces they could spare, and too important to abandon, and so it changed hands again. The Greens, seeing the Blacks stretched thin, sent a force under Sir Criston to retake Harrenhal. Cole was a skilled commander, and he knew that a direct assault on those walls would be madness. Instead, he used guile. He marched his army toward the castle, but he also sent word to the garrison that the castle's new lord, a man named Simon Strong, was a traitor to the Blacks. The garrison, already demoralized and hungry, turned on their own commander. They opened the gates to Cole without a fight. Harrenhal had changed hands again, this time through betrayal rather than battle, but the Greens could not hold it either. The castle was a drain on their supplies, and the Riverlands were full of enemies. Cole left a small garrison and moved on, and soon the Blacks returned. This time they came with a larger force, and they retook the castle in a brief but bloody fight. The pattern repeated: seize, abandon, seize again. Each time the castle's defenders grew fewer, its walls more cracked, its reputation more cursed. The lords who held Harrenhal during the war paid a terrible price. Simon Strong, the Castellan who had opened the gates to Cole, was later executed by the Blacks for his treachery. The garrison that betrayed him was slaughtered. The next lord, a man named Lord Darklyn, died of a fever within a month of taking command. The castle seemed to devour its masters. It was not just the size that made it difficult to defend. It was the curse. Everyone knew the stories. Harren the Black had burned alive in his own tower. Every lord since had met some grim fate. The castle was a monument to the cost of ambition, and the war only proved that no one could master it without paying in blood. By the time the dance reached its bloody peak, Harrenhal had become a symbol of the war's futility. It was a prize that brought no glory, only ruin. The Blacks and Greens both poured men and resources into holding it, and both lost those men to disease, desertion, and the occasional skirmish. The castle stood empty for long stretches, its gates hanging open, its halls silent. It was a ghost of a fortress, a reminder that even the greatest works of stone and mortar could not protect against the chaos of civil war. And through it all, Larys Strong watched from a distance. He had abandoned Harrenhal, but he had not abandoned his ambitions. The castle was a tool to him, a piece on the board. He knew that its value was not in its walls, but in the fear it inspired. Every lord who held it feared the curse. Every soldier who garrisoned it felt the weight of its history. Larys used that fear, whispering rumours and spreading doubt, ensuring that Harrenhal remained a source of instability for both sides. The castle would change hands many more times before the war ended. It would be burned, rebuilt, and burned again. Its towers would crumble, its halls would fill with snow, and its stones would soak up the blood of countless men. But the pattern was already set. Harrenhal was not a fortress to be held. It was a wound that would not heal, a burden that no lord could carry without breaking. And as the war ground on, the castle's curse would claim more victims, each one convinced that they could be the one to tame it. The previous chapter left us at Harrenhal, a castle too vast for any garrison to hold, changing hands as the war dragged on. But while the Riverlands bled and the great fortress passed from lord to lord, Larys Strong remained in King's Landing. He had not gone to Harrenhal after the fire that killed his father and brother. He had stayed in the capital, close to Queen Alicent, close to the whispers that filled the Red Keep like smoke. And as the dance of the dragons tore the realm apart, Larys watched the city change hands not once but twice, and each time he found a way to survive. When the war began, King's Landing belonged to the Greens. Aegon II sat the Iron Throne, and Alicent Hightower ruled from the shadows. Larys served as her Master of Whisperers, a role that suited him perfectly. He had built a network of informants that reached into every corner of the city. Servants, gold cloaks, merchants, even the Silent Sisters who tended the dead. No one noticed a man with a clubfoot limping through corridors. because they had already dismissed him. That was the source of his power. He was invisible because he was underestimated. But as the war progressed, the balance shifted. Rhaenyra's forces grew stronger. Her son Jacaerys flew north to secure the Starks and the Arryns, while her other son Lucerys died at Storm's End, a tragedy that hardened her resolve. In the capital, the Greens began to fracture. Aegon II was wounded at Rook's Rest, burned and broken, and his brother Aemond took command of the war effort. Larys watched these changes with the same cold patience he had always shown. He did not panic. He did not flee. He simply waited. And when the tide turned, he was ready. In the year 130 after Aegon's conquest, Rhaenyra's forces, led by the dragon rider Daemon Targaryen and the sea snake Corlys Velaryon, took King's Landing without a battle. The city opened its gates. The gold cloaks turned their cloaks. Queen Alicent and the Dowager Queen Helaena were taken captive. Aegon II fled, and Rhaenyra claimed the Iron Throne at last. For most of the Green faction, this was a catastrophe. Lords who had supported Aegon were executed or imprisoned. Their lands were seized. Their families were scattered. But Larys Strong was not among the prisoners. He had not fled with the king. He had stayed in the Red Keep. And when Rhaenyra's men came for him, he offered them something they could not refuse. He offered them secrets. Larys knew where every Green loyalist had hidden their gold. He knew which servants had carried messages between Alicent and the Lords of the Reach. He knew the tunnels beneath the castle, the passages that even the castle's builders had forgotten. He traded this knowledge for his life, and for a place at Rhaenyra's court. The Queen, desperate for allies and information after years of war, accepted his service. She did not trust him. No one trusted Larys Strong, but she needed him, and that was enough. So Larys survived the fall of the Greens. He became Master of Whisperers once more, this time for the Blacks. He watched Rhaenyra's rule crumble from within. He saw her grow paranoid, saw her alienate the very lords who had placed her on the throne. He saw the city turn against her as the cost of war mounted and the dragons burned the countryside. And when the time came, he was ready to switch again. Because Larys Strong did not serve a faction. He served himself, and he understood something that few others grasped. In a war that destroys everything, the only currency that matters is information. Secrets are portable. They do not burn in a fire. They do not die in a battle. They can be carried from one regime to the next, traded for safety, for power, for survival. When Aegon II returned to King's Landing with a sellsword army and the Dragon Sunfire, Rhaenyra fled. The city fell again, and Larys Strong was there, waiting. He had already sent word to Aegon's supporters, offering his services once more. He knew where Rhaenyra had hidden her remaining treasury. He knew which lords in the city had secretly remained loyal to the Greens. He knew the names of the men who had helped Rhaenyra escape. He gave Aegon everything he needed to reassert control, and Aegon, broken and bitter, accepted. He needed someone who understood the city's secrets, someone who could root out the remaining Black loyalists. Larys became his Master of Whisperers for the third time in as many years. This is the pattern of Larys Strong's life. He does not thrive in peace. When the realm is stable, when the laws are clear, and the succession is settled, a man like Larys has little room to maneuver. He is a crippled lord from a minor house, easily ignored. But when institutions collapse, when the old rules are shattered, and every lord is scrambling for advantage, Larys becomes indispensable. He is the man who knows where the bodies are buried. He is the man who can find a traitor in any room. He is the man who can whisper a single sentence and change the fate of a kingdom. And he loves it. Not in the way a warrior loves glory or a lord loves honor. Larys loves the uncertainty. He loves the chaos. He loves the feeling of being the only one who sees the board clearly, while everyone else is stumbling in the dark. The fall of King's Landing was not a tragedy to him. It was an opportunity. Each time the city changed hands, he gained new leverage. Each regime change made him more valuable, because each regime needed someone who had survived the last one. By the end of the dance, Larys Strong had served 3 kings and 1 queen. He had watched the capital burn and rebuild and burn again. He had outlived nearly every other player in the game, and he had done it not by fighting, not by commanding armies, but by knowing things that other people needed to know. But even Larys could not control everything. The war was ending, the dragons were dead, the realm was exhausted, and soon the chaos that had made him powerful would begin to fade. The institutions would reform, the old rules would return, and a man who thrived in the cracks of a broken system would find himself with nowhere left to hide. That is the fate of those who dance too close to the fire. They survive the flames, but when the ashes cool, they are left standing alone, holding nothing but the secrets that no one wants to hear anymore. The war had turned King's Landing into a city of ghosts. When the dust settled after the fall of Rhaenyra Targaryen, the capital was scarred, its streets filled with the memory of blood and fire, and in the midst of that silence, Larys Strong remained. He had survived the fall of 1 queen, and now he stood ready to serve the king who had taken her place. But Larys did not serve out of loyalty. He served because chaos was the soil in which he grew strongest. The final bloodiest stages of the Dance of the Dragons were not fought on open fields. They were fought in the corridors of power, in the whispers of servants, in the careful placement of a knife or a word. And Larys Strong was a master of that kind of war. He had watched the dragons burn each other from the sky, had seen the great houses tear themselves apart, and through it all, he had kept his hands clean while others drowned in their own ambition. When Aegon II sat the Iron Throne once more, his reign was a short and bitter thing. He was a king broken by the war, his body scarred, his mind twisted by the losses he had endured. And in that broken king, Larys saw an opportunity. He positioned himself as an indispensable advisor, a man who knew the secrets of the court, who could navigate the treacherous waters of the Green faction with the ease of a fish swimming through a river of blood. But Aegon II was not a man who could be controlled for long. His paranoia grew with each passing day, and soon he began to see enemies everywhere, even among those who had served him most faithfully. It was in this atmosphere of suspicion that Larys wove his most dangerous schemes. He whispered of plots and conspiracies, feeding the king's fears with carefully chosen words. He spoke of the lords who might rise against the crown, of the women who might bear bastards to challenge the throne, of the very air itself who seemed to carry the scent of betrayal. And Aegon II, isolated and desperate, listened. He ordered arrests, executions, and purges, thinning the ranks of his own supporters until only the most loyal or the most cunning remained. And Larys, of course, was among the cunning. But the war was not yet finished. Even as Aegon II tried to consolidate his power, the Blacks still had a claimant, the young Aegon III, son of Rhaenyra and Daemon, a boy who had witnessed horrors that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The war had become a struggle, not just for the throne, but for the soul of the realm. And in that struggle, Larys saw the future. He knew that the boy king, if he survived, would be the key to power for decades to come. And so, when the final act of the dance played out, when Aegon II was poisoned in his own chambers, Larys was ready. The death of Aegon II was a murky affair, shrouded in rumour and half-truths. Some said it was the work of his own men, tired of his paranoia and cruelty. Others whispered of a plot by the remaining Black loyalists, who had infiltrated the Green Court. But there were those who noticed that Larys Strong had been seen in the corridors near the king's chambers on the night of the poisoning, and there were those who noticed that he had emerged from that night with a new purpose, a new allegiance, a new king to serve. When the young Aegon III was crowned, he was a child of 11 years, a boy who had seen his mother devoured by a dragon, who had been held captive by his uncle's forces, who had learned to trust no one. And into that void of trust stepped Larys Strong. He presented himself as a loyal servant of the crown, a man who had served the realm through the worst of the war, a man who could guide the young king through the treacherous years ahead. But Larys did not seek to guide, he sought to control. The regency that followed the coronation of Aegon III was a time of chaos and competition. The great lords of Westeros vied for influence over the boy king, each hoping to bend his will to their own purposes. And in that contest, Larys Strong was a shadow among shadows. He did not seek the title of regent, did not sit on the council in plain sight. Instead, he worked through others, planting seeds of doubt and ambition in the minds of the powerful. He whispered to the lords of the Reach, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, each word carefully chosen to serve his own ends. But the young king was not so easily controlled. Aegon III had inherited his mother's stubbornness and his father's wariness. He watched the lords around him with a cold, calculating gaze, and he trusted none of them. And yet, even a wary king can be manipulated by a man who knows his fears. Larys knew that the boy was haunted by the memory of dragons, by the sight of his mother's death, by the knowledge that the world was filled with those who would use him for their own gain. And so, Larys offered him something rare, the illusion of safety. He positioned himself as the king's most reliable advisor, the one man who asked for nothing in return. He provided information, counsel, and a steady hand in the storm of the regency, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to shape the young king's decisions. He recommended appointments, suggested policies, and guided the boy's attention away from the things that might threaten his own power. The war had ended, but the battle for control of the throne had only just begun. And yet, even as Larys tightened his grip on the court, the seeds of his own destruction were being sown. The lords of Westeros were not blind. They saw the Clubfoot's influence, saw the way he moved through the shadows, and they began to whisper among themselves. They spoke of the fire at Harrenhal, of the deaths of Lyonel and Harwin Strong, and of the son who had survived to claim the family's legacy. They spoke of the poison that had killed Aegon II, and of the man who had been seen near the king's chambers. And they began to wonder, how far would Larys Strong go to keep his power? The answer came in the form of a plot, a conspiracy that would end the life of the last Strong. The details are murky, lost to the fog of history, but the outcome is clear. Larys Strong, the Clubfoot, the master of Westeros, the shadow that had outlived the dragons, is finally brought down. Some say he was betrayed by his own spies, that the network he had built so carefully turned against him. Others say the young king himself ordered his death, finally seeing the truth of the man who had surrounded him. But whatever the cause, the result was the same. Larys Strong died, and with him the last schemes of the Clubfoot came to an end. But even in death, Larys left a mark on the realm. The young king Aegon III would rule for many years, his reign shaped by the shadows of the war and the manipulations of those who had sought to control him. And the name of House Strong, once a symbol of legal power and courtly influence, became a byword for intrigue and betrayal. The castle of Harrenhal, that vast and cursed monument to ambition, passed to other hands, its stones soaked in the memory of the family that had risen and fallen within its wall. And so, the story of House Strong ends not with a dragon's fire, but with a whisper in the dark. The Clubfoot had outlived his father and his brother, had outlived the war that had consumed so many, had even outlived the dragons themselves. But in the end, the shadows he had mastered could not protect him from the very forces he had unleashed. The last schemes of Larys Strong were his final legacy, a reminder that even the most careful plans can unravel when the world itself is built on ashes. The war was over, but the Red Keep had never felt more fragile. Young King Aegon III sat the Iron Throne, a boy of 10 who had seen horrors no child should witness. His mother devoured by his uncle's dragon, his own uncle poisoned, the capital sacked and burned. The realm needed order, and the regency that formed around him was determined to restore it. But order required accountability, and accountability meant confronting the men who had thrived in the chaos. Among them, none was more elusive, more quietly dangerous than Larys Strong. Larys had survived every turn of the dance. He had served Queen Alicent, then King Aegon II, then the short-lived regime of the usurper's son. He had offered secrets to whoever held power, always careful to keep his own hands clean. He had watched his father and brother burn at Harrenhal, and he had done nothing to save them. Perhaps even arranged it. He had whispered poison into ears, manipulated factions, and ensured that House Strong, though reduced to a single man, remained a name that mattered. But the Regency was not the old court. These were men who had seen the cost of Larys's games. They knew the Clubfoot's reputation, and they were not interested in his services. The arrest came quietly, as most things did with Larys. There was no dramatic confrontation in the throne room, no shouted accusations. One morning, guards arrived at his chambers in Maegor's Holdfast. They found him seated at a desk, a single candle burning, a letter half written. He did not resist. He had always known that survival was a matter of timing, and his time had run out. The Regency had gathered evidence, testimony from servants, intercepted messages, the confessions of lesser conspirators who hoped to save their own necks. Larys Strong was charged with treason, with conspiracy, with the murder of his own father and brother. The charges were read aloud in a chamber that had once been his stage. He listened without expression. The trial, if it could be called that, was brief. The regents did not want a spectacle. They wanted closure. They wanted to show the realm that the old ways of shadow and whisper were over. Larys was given no opportunity to defend himself, no chance to weave his usual web of half-truths and plausible deniability. His long career of secrets and manipulation was brought into the open before the realm's new rulers. Witnesses spoke of his network of spies, his habit of collecting information that could ruin men, his role in the fire at Harrenhal. They spoke of his dealings with the Greens, his betrayals of the Blacks, his willingness to serve any master as long as he could profit. The truth, once exposed, was damning. Larys said little. Perhaps he understood that words had lost their power. Perhaps he had already accepted what was coming. He had spent his life in the shadows, and now the light was merciless. The regents pronounced their judgment. Death. The method was beheading, the traditional end for traitors. There would be no poison, no subtlety, no chance for escape. The execution was set for the next morning in the courtyard of the Red Keep. The day was grey and cold. A small crowd gathered, nobles, servants, a few curious onlookers from the city. Larys Strong was led out in chains. He walked with the same deliberate, unhurried gait he had always used, as if he were still in control. He did not beg. He did not proclaim his innocence. He looked at the block, then at the headsman, and said nothing. The axe fell, and the clubfoot was gone. It was a reminder that survival is not the same as victory. Larys Strong had outlived his father and brother, outlived Queen Alicent, outlived King Aegon II, outlived almost everyone who had once held power. He had navigated the dance with a skill that bordered on genius. But in the end, he had no allies, no legacy, no one to mourn him. House Strong, which had risen from the Riverlands to the heart of the Iron Throne, ended not with a dragon's fire or a battle cry, but with a single stroke of a blade in a quiet courtyard. The Regency moved on. They had other problems to solve. A depleted treasury, a shattered realm, a king who barely spoke. Harrenhal, the castle that had been the seat of House Strong, passed into other hands. It would change owners many times in the years to come, each new lord hoping to tame its vast, cursed halls. But the name Strong would linger, not as a house of power, but as a cautionary tale. A family that climbed too high too fast and fell into the fire they had helped kindle. And so Larys Strong met his end in the Red Keep, dragged from the shadows he had so carefully cultivated into the harsh light of judgment. The Regency that governed in the name of the young King Aegon III had no use for the Clubfoot secrets any longer. They needed order, not intrigue. They needed stability, not the whispered poison that had kept Larys alive through 4 changes of regime. And so the last Lord of Harrenhal was taken, his schemes finally exhausted, his web of informants scattered or dead. House Strong, which had risen from the Riverlands to the very foot of the Iron Throne, ceased to exist as a political force in that moment, but the disappearance of a house from the centre of history is not the same as its erasure from memory, and House Strong left behind something more lasting than its name. It left a pattern, a shape cut into the fabric of Westerosi politics that would not be easily mended. Consider the three men who defined this family at its peak, and consider how different they were. Lyonel Strong, the father, served the realm with a lawyer's precision and a lord's sense of duty. He was master of laws, then Hand of the King, and he performed both roles with a competence that earned him respect, even from those who resented his rise. He was not born to the highest circles, but he earned his place through service. He believed in the institutions of the realm, in the law, in the orderly transfer of power from one king to the next. And that belief, that faith in order, was what made him valuable to Viserys I. It was also what made him blind to the chaos gathering around him. Harwin Strong, the eldest son, was cut from different cloth. Where Lyonel was measured, Harwin was passionate. Where Lyonel reasoned, Harwin acted. He was called Breakbones for his strength in the tawny yard. But his true legacy was written in the nursery of the Red Keep. His devotion to Rhaenyra Targaryen was not a political calculation. It was not a strategy for advancement. It was something far more dangerous in the world of Westerosi politics. It was genuine. He loved her, and she loved him, and that love produced 3 sons who would be claimed by another man's name. The rumours followed them like a shadow, and those rumours became weapons in the hands of the Greens. Harwin's devotion, so pure in its essence, became fuel for the fire that would consume his house. And then there was Larys, the youngest son, the one who survived. Where Lyonel served the law and Harwin served his heart, Larys served only himself. He was the Clubfoot, the whisperer in the shadows, the man who knew where the bodies were buried because he had put some of them there himself. He did not seek power in the open as his father had. He did not seek love in the light as his brother had. He sought control, the quiet kind that comes from knowing what others do not want known. He cultivated secrets the way a gardener cultivates vines, training them to grow where he wanted, pruning them when they threatened to overreach. And when the fire came to Harrenhal, when Lyonel and Harwin perished in the flames that consumed the cast's Extinction, Larys was not there. He was far away in King's Landing, his hands clean, his path clear. The fire at Harrenhal remains one of the great unanswered questions of the Dance of the Dragons. Was it accident or design? The official record calls it a tragedy, a terrible misfortune that claimed 2 good men, but the whispers have never stopped. And Larys, who benefited more than anyone from the deaths of his father and brother, never faced public accusation. He was too careful for that. He had built his defences too well, but the suspicion clung to him, and it coloured everything he did afterward. What followed was the long, slow unravelling of the house. Larys served the Greens, then served whoever held power, then served himself. He helped orchestrate the fall of King's Landing to Rhaenyra's forces, then helped undermine her rule from within. He was present at the worst moments of the war, always standing slightly to the side, always watching, always calculating. And when the war ended, when the dragons were dead, and the princes were dead, and the kingdoms lay exhausted, he was still there, still scheming, still trying to find a way to turn the chaos to his advantage. But the Regency was not fooled, or perhaps they were simply tired of being fooled. The young king's regents had seen enough of Larys Strong's kind. They had watched the realm tear itself apart because of men like him, men who placed their own survival above every other consideration, and so they judged him, and they executed him, and they closed the book on House Strong. But the legacy of the house did not end with Larys's death. It could not, because the damage had already been done. House Strong's brief ascent from the Riverlands to the centre of royal power had helped ignite the succession crisis that consumed dragons, princes, and entire kingdoms. The paternity of Rhaenyra's sons, the question that Harwin's devotion had raised, and that Larys's machinations had exploited, was one of the sparks that set the realm ablaze. Without the Strongs, the dance of the dragons might still have happened. The Targaryen succession was fragile enough without them, but the Strongs gave the conflict a personal edge, a scandal that could be whispered in every hall from the Wall to Dawn. They made the war not just a matter of politics, but of blood, and so the house vanished from the centre of history. Its lands were granted to others. Its name faded from the rolls of the great houses. The Riverlands moved on, as the Riverlands always do, absorbing the rise and fall of families the way the rivers absorbed the rain. But Harrenhal remained. The vast, cursed castle that had been the seat of House Strong stood on. Its towers blackened by the fire that had killed Lyonel and Harwin, its halls empty of the family that had briefly called it home. Harrenhal is a monument to many things. To the ambition of Harren the Black, who built it, to the dragons of Aegon the Conqueror, who melted its towers, to the curse that is said to haunt its stones, bringing ruin to every family that claims it. But it is also a monument to House Strong, and to every family that believed power could be safely possessed. The castle stands as a reminder that in Westeros, the high places are the most dangerous, that the closer you come to the Iron Throne, the more likely you are to be consumed by its fire. The Strongs rose through law, through love, and through cunning. They fell through fire, through war, and through the simple fact that the Game of Thrones does not forgive. Lyonel served faithfully and died in a blaze that may have been set by his own son. Harwin loved truly and left behind a legacy of rumour that would tear a kingdom apart. Larys survived by any means necessary and ended his life in a dungeon, his secrets finally worthless. There is no moral to this story, no tidy lesson about virtue or vice. There is only the record of what happened, the names and dates and deaths that make up the history of Westeros. How Strong rose and how Strong fell, and Harrenhal remains. The castle does not care who sits in its halls. It has outlasted them all, and it will outlast many more. Its stones hold the memory of the fire, of the family that burned, of the son who walked away, and in the quiet of the Riverlands, under the stars that have watched over 1,000 such rises and falls, Harrenhal waits for the next house that believes it can hold power safely. It always will.